In the year 1983, the devil himself paid a visit to the small Midwestern town of Jordan, Minnesota. And the devil in his wake left a trail of shattered lives, victimized kids, broken families, and potentially the bodies of multiple murdered children. Nobody in this small town of approximately 2,700 wanted to believe that this was possible, that their neighbors next door, the friendly couple with kids of their own, could be accused of worshiping the devil during late-night rituals and mechanically children. But this is the reality now of life here in Jordan, Minnesota, where over a dozen local adults have been arrested by local authorities on suspicion that they were involved in an occult-influenced ring that recruited and used local children to feed their darkest desires and sickest pleasures.
No one wants to believe that evil could potentially touch their hometown. Nobody wants to imagine a world where their friends, neighbors, and even family members could conspire together to harm children in their own backyard. But unfortunately, and tragically, these dark thoughts became an even darker reality in the town of Jordan, Minnesota, in the year 1983. To this very day, local and national authorities refuse to admit that an occult-influenced group of local adults were working with criminals in the small town of Jordan, Minnesota, to pimp out and children from the area. But sometimes, reality is stranger than fiction. The story of the Jordan, Minnesota child ring is one of the most disturbing ever told, and it was completely covered up by the United States government. Join us today as we expose these secrets that have remained hidden for over 40 years and investigate claims of murder, child, and Satanism in the small town of Jordan, Minnesota.
In September of 1983, evil paid a visit to the small town of Jordan, Minnesota. It's funny how evil works. You never know exactly when and where it's going to strike, but when it does, it happens fast and it has no remorse. The evil in Jordan crept its way through local homes, slithered throughout a small mobile home park, and expanded its pitch-black wings on the bank of a local river. But according to authorities, this evil never existed in the first place. To this day, they deny that any of what I'm about to tell you is true. But as you know, we're talking about this case for a reason. This could be one of the largest predator rings that was ever covered up in all of American history. A ring that involved elements of Satanism, murder, rituals, games, and so much more. Today, we're diving deep into the story of a ring that was operating in Jordan, Minnesota, and we're going to visit the locations from the story, investigate them, and search for proof that these weren't just allegations. This is a dark reality, and try to prove that this story, as unbelievable as it was true. Before we start today's video, I want to state, I do not want to do anything to myself. I do not want anything to happen to me in the near future, so I'm not planning on doing anything. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions presented in today's show are solely mine, Colin, the producer and host of this program. And if you want to continue researching this case on your own, I had to dig very deep into some documents. I'm going to post a link to a really good document where a lot of this reporting was drawn from in the description of the video. So if you want to do your own research, go right ahead. But let's get to today's story. Jordan, Minnesota is a small town in Minnesota that combines historical significance, natural beauty, and community spirit, and serves as a bedroom community for the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. It really is, simply put, a slice of small town America. With its population of around 6,500, historic downtown with the Jordan train depot, and location along the Minnesota River, Jordan has a unique character and a soul all its own. It's the small town partner to the nearby Twin Cities, a picture-perfect place to raise a family. But in 1983, Jordan, Minnesota was exactly where the devil chose to make his next appearance here on Earth. It all started with a mom's desperate cry in September of 1983. Now, before we get into the story, I do want to state that although most of the names here have stayed the same, there have been some names that were changed to protect children and protect people's identities. People who have never been fully identified. So just note that if you try to look this up on your own, there have been some names changed. But for the adults, most of their names are the same. They are their actual names. So this whole thing started with a mom's desperate cry in September of 1983, when a woman named Christine Brown stormed into the Jordan, Minnesota police station, dragging her 9-year-old daughter, Susie Brown, and Susie's 10-year-old friend, Violet Kath, in tow. That day, Christine demanded that she speak with an officer and proceeded to tell them that a local man named James Rood had been her child. This little town of 2,700 at the time, nestled along the Minnesota River, had no idea what was coming. This was the start of something very big and very dark. So here's where we get into one of the first bizarre things about this case. In the media, the Jordan, Minnesota cases have always been framed as some sort of witch hunt or a bit of satanic panic hysteria. The media, for some reason, tried their hardest after all was said and done to exonerate those who were accused of molesting children. And yet, there was tons of evidence that these allegations may have been true before the allegations were even made themselves. To start, we have to talk about that guy, James Rood, the first man accused of being a part of these crimes. James Rood, at the time of the first accusations, was a 25-year-old trash collector who lived at the Valley Green trailer park in town. James had moved towns a few times over the years, and for good reason. You see, in 1978, James was serving time in the Army in Newport News, Virginia, when he was charged, arrested, and convicted for taking indecent liberties with children under the age of 13. However, he wasn't sentenced to any lengthy prison sentence, and he was out of prison within 2 years. But at that point, James couldn't control himself, and by July of 1980, he had moved to Minnesota and had been arrested again for assaulting a child, on charges that he had two young girls, both under the age of 13. He ended up pleading guilty to a lesser charge in that case, was sentenced to a measly 90 days in jail, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to attend mandatory behavior therapy classes for sex offenders. So at this point in this life, bear with me here, James Rood had molested multiple children across multiple states and had barely received any prison time or jail time for it. If authorities would have actually punished James for the crimes he had committed, he never would have been allowed to live in the Valley Green trailer park, where he was surrounded constantly by growing families and their young children. Time and time again, this serial was let off with simple slaps on the wrist, but it was there in Jordan, Minnesota, where James's darkest of deeds would eventually come to light. On October 1st, local authorities hauled James out of his beat-up trailer in the Valley Green trailer park in Jordan and slapped him with 13 counts of at least 4 kids under the age of 10, including Christine's daughter, Susie. According to the paper Revisiting the Jordan, Minnesota Cases by Rossi Cheat and Andrea Matthews, which we will be citing frequently throughout this episode, Susie, Christine's daughter, quote, recalled James Rood picking her up to just have some fun, end quote, and bringing her and her brother to his trailer, where she alleged that he touched her area. Susie had told the authorities that James had cornered her behind a dumpster and touched her private parts, her shaky voice breaking as she spilled the truth to officers who scribbled it down fast. Christine Brown, the mother of Susie, had started off this journey simply trying to fight for justice for her own daughter, but by bringing her in to make these allegations, she ended up ripping open a nightmare that would spread through Jordan like a wildfire that nobody could put out. Cops sat there that day, pens flying, immediately knowing that this was bigger than one creep, the air in the station thick with tension. This wasn't just some small-time bust, it was the start of a sick story that will make your blood boil when you see how it ends, because these monsters got away with their crimes. There were dozens of people accused of committing these sick acts against children, and only one of them went down for what happened. For those kids, it was a scream for help that got drowned out. And it's a damn shame that justice never showed its face. Now, during Susie's first interview with the police, she didn't make very detailed allegations against James Rood or any of the others that would come to be known in the case. In fact, she frequently stated that she couldn't remember the details or recall certain events. However, this would all change when she was sat down once again for a second interview. this time without her mother, Christine Brown, in the room with her. You see, throughout the first police interview, Susie's mother had been sitting in the room with her, seemingly making sure that she said the right things and didn't implicate anyone other than James. But once Susie was alone with the detectives, the dark and disturbing truth came pouring out. During her second and third interviews with authorities, Susie Brown provided an expanded account of the sickening activities that she had been forced to participate in. These stories included allegations of parties, incestuous conduct, and the production of child pornography, which I'll be calling CP for the rest of this film. And these stories, though they seemed bizarre and fantastical, were later corroborated by other children and at least one adult. Furthermore, Susie articulated these statements at a very early stage of her interviews with law enforcement, specifically during her second and third interviews, before there was any other testimony and before the story really broke. So basically, she wasn't getting these details from newspapers or the television. She was finding this truth within. Initially, Susie, along with others, recalled events that transpired within James Rood's trailer. Subsequently, narratives surfaced concerning a occurring at a woman named Judith Cath's residence. But shortly afterwards, more disturbing details began to emerge, and the children started talking about other places where they had been victimized by adults. One of these places was a woman named Judith Cath's residence, involving Susie, Violet Cath, Judith's daughter, and two different children identified as Sandra and Michelle Graham. So now there was another house where this stuff was taking place, under the watch of a different woman, and there were now 4 victims. Additionally, several other stories from Susie detailed incidents that transpired at the home of Alvin and Rosemary Rood, James Rood's own parents. Each of these incident clusters is supported by multiple witnesses across multiple interviews, conducted prior to any potential contamination of testimony through the interaction of children. In her preliminary interviews, Susie also accurately described the complicated interpersonal relationships amongst the group of adults, who would soon emerge as the core of that predator ring. Susie, you see, had only been subject to one additional interview before she was placed into protective custody on November 16th, and on that very date, she insinuated that there were sexual connections between James Rood, Judith Cath, her friend's mother, Marlene Germundson, the mother of the other victims, and her own mother, Christine Brown. These relationships were later confirmed to be true by the adults themselves. Judith Cath, the mother of Violet, had dated James Rood during the summer of 1983 that year, and she intended to marry him. And Christine Brown, Susie's mother, had similarly engaged in romantic and sexual liaisons with James Rood. So basically, these kids were telling the authorities, not only are we being victimized by these adults, but my mom's dating this guy who's victimizing me, and this guy's also been dating my friend's mom. So they were describing all these relationships between the adults, showing that it wasn't just completely random, and the adults confirmed that these things were true. And Susie's declarations regarding the locations and participants of the alleged aligned with those dynamics. She told the authorities that on multiple occasions, James Rood touched her. He touched her brother Joey. He touched her friend Violet Cath, either while they were inside of James's trailer or Judith Cath's trailer. Susie even described a specific incident between Judith Cath, her friend's mother, and James Rood, the already convicted, that happened within James's trailer. Now, according to Susie, one day inside of James's trailer, he had forced both young Susie and Violet to perform on him, and he then performed on Violet. After seeing these vile acts with her own eyes, according to young Susie, Judith Cath then approached James, slapped him in the face, and demanded that he stopped having conduct with the children. But she never went to the police. She never actually did anything about it. According to the story, she was trying to save face, but it couldn't undo the damage that had already been done, because Susie wasn't done talking yet. At this point in her interviews with the police, she began to describe a series of parties that occurred at the house of her friend's mother, Judith Cath. Descriptions that were so incredibly detailed that to the authorities, it actually lent a lot of credibility to her claims. Susie described a sequence of events at Judith Cath's home wherein her mother, Christine, Violet's mother, Judith, and James Rood engaged in touching or the kids and compelled the children to either touch or perform on the adults. She also alleged that these 3 adults, her own mother, her friend's mother, and the convicted predator, took her younger brother Joey, and several other children to Judith's bedroom, where all three participated in acts with the children and amongst themselves. So you gotta imagine, this is this girl's own mother she's talking about, participating in these sickening acts with adults and children. She is victimizing her own blood daughter. You have another mother who's allegedly victimizing her own blood daughter, all with this guy who, unbeknownst to authorities really at the time, was a previously convicted predator. But how could they know that Susie was telling the truth? Well, during that interview with the police, they showed Susie some photographic lineups. And out of that lineup, she identified James Rood and Richard Rood, James's brother. That's right, she described all of this and then she was able to pick out her abusers at just 9 years old. So after this interview, Scott County law enforcement placed Susie's mother, Christine Brown, under arrest and immediately placed all 5 of her kids into child protective custody. Although existing records of this initial interview with Susie lack a verbatim transcript, corroboration of these statements was provided by other children and, like I said before, adults. So basically you had all these kids that suddenly came forward and they were all describing the exact same events happening at the exact same locations with the exact same participants at the same times. They're describing all this in very graphic, disgusting detail, and they're also able to pick out their victimizers from photo lineups. Like, they clearly know who these people were. They picked them out right away. Violet Kath, Susie's 10-year-old friend and the daughter of Judith, ended up corroborating all the alleged incidents at her mother's residence through a completely independent interview with authorities. Violet told the officers stories about multiple occasions within her own home, during which she and Susie were forced to perform on or receive it from James Rood, Judith Kath, and another local mother named Marlene Germundson. Now, as Violet and Susie were interviewed at almost the exact same time before the news broke, and both gave incredibly detailed and precisely similar recollections of events, their testimonies can be seen as having corroborated each other. How could these two children be describing the exact same events with the exact same people, the exact same details, the same names, the same locations, if these events, or any form of them, never happened? Violet Kath's first interview occurred on September 26th. Days before James Rood was arrested, with an additional session prior to her placement in protective custody happening over a month and a half later on November 14th. Over the next few months, Violet would be interviewed 42 different times by the cops. Now, we'll talk about that later and the ramifications of what exactly that means, but in those very first interviews, the most important interviews in this story, Violet completely corroborated all of Susie's statements. She and Susie were being interviewed almost at the exact same time, and they were giving authorities the exact same details. And remember, Christine, Susie's mother, was actually the first one to bring the kids into the police station. So I don't know if she at the time was trying to get ahead of this whole thing. She wanted to play the part of the wholesome, happy mother who was bringing her child in to protect her child, and she wanted to take James Rood down. And, you know, she was in the interview room with her daughter, so maybe she was trying to act like this concerned parent. But it all changed, obviously, when Christine was removed from the interview room, and according to the children, the real truth came out. Now, during those interviews conducted on September 26th, November 15th, and November 17th, 1983, Violet described James Rood taking photographs of her while she was and producing CP. In Violet's second interview on November 15th, she alleged that she had witnessed her mother, Judith, James Rood, the convicted predator, and James's brother, Richard, engaging in acts with Sandra and Michelle Graham, the children of another accused person. Violet further told the authorities that she had discovered photographs inside of James's trailer that showed James, his brother Richard, and his other brother Tom with the young Graham girls, who were children, just to remind you, while they were. Violet also told the authorities statements regarding photography and specific incidents tied to a local county fair, which were corroborated by interviews with other children and adults. So basically, Violet was telling the police, not only were these guys and my own mom and my friend's mother, not only were they victimizing us, they were stripping us and taking photographs of us. And she had also stumbled upon, I don't know if it was a photo book or what, full of photographs of James and his brothers posing with these children. So this was something that they had been doing for a while. And in that second interview, Violet also described 2 incidents that happened at that county fair in August of 1983. Violet said that on that day, James Rood had picked her up at her home, photographed her, and had proceeded to rape In an interview on November 15th, she also stated that the adults involved in this sick ring frequently took photographs of each other and the children. And she told the police, the photographs have to be there somewhere. I'm in some of the photographs. They've taken the photographs of me, and I've seen the piles and photo books full of these photographs. And shortly after Violet's interview, another child who was interviewed, 11-year-old Lucy Armstrong, corroborated Violet's stories regarding that photography. Marlene Germundson, the mother of Sandra and Michelle Germundson, who was also accused by both Susie and Violet of having participated in these parties, also corroborated Violet's own stories of James Rood's practice of photographing children. That's right, Marlene Germundson, who was the mother who was accused of molesting her own kids and participating in the molesting of all these other kids, she told the authorities that straight up that James Rood did like to take photographs of children. She admitted that in her statements to the Scott County sheriffs. You see, after Marlene's arrest in November of 1983, she waived her Miranda rights and expressed a desire to, quote, conclude the matter expeditiously, end quote. So she immediately opened up about her crimes against children to the cops. At first, Marlene was hesitant to admit to all that she had done. But then she really started talking. First, Marlene admitted that she frequently brought her kids over to James Rood's home. Then she stated that her 2 twin daughters had additionally been present at Judith Kath's house. Remember, those are 2 hotspots that these children were alleging abuse occurred at. But according to Marlene Germundson, James Rood had taken her 2 daughters into a separate room for 5 or 10 minutes, and had then replicated this action with young Violet Kath. According to Marlene, she didn't know what was going on in that room, but she, quote, presumed the children were subjected to sexual assault, end quote, by James. Going further, Marlene even told the detectives that James had confessed to her that he had taken photographs of her own daughters and of multiple other children. Marlene also disclosed that her own children had told her in April or May of 1983 that James Rood had been molesting them and taking new photos of them. But for some reason, it was now September of 1983, 4 months after her children had told her that they were being assaulted by an adult, and this was the very first time that she was speaking to the police, only after she had been arrested. So at this point, you had 2 children making these incredibly bizarre, incredibly detailed allegations against a group of adults in their lives. They described the relationships between the adults, they described the interiors of their houses, they even alleged that there were photos and sometimes videos being taken of the assaults. Then, one of the adults that was accused comes into the police station in a completely independent interview and corroborates everything that the children have been alleging. I mean, that detail is so insane to me. This Marlene woman actually knew that James Rood had been victimizing her own daughters. She was in the house when he took them into another room, and she told the police she knew what he was doing in there. He was r***ing them. She also said that her daughters had told her that they were being molested by James Rood, and she in addition stated that James Rood had told her about the photos he was taking of these kids, and she did nothing. She never went to the police, she never tried to stop it, she never intervened until she was arrested, until she was caught red-handed for being a part of this. This storm was growing deeper and darker by the second, and would shortly escalate into alleged murder, rituals, and so much more. Now, the Jordan police could have significantly strengthened and proved their case if they had ever found those photographs of the kids and taken it in as evidence. However, upon James Rood's arrest, since he was arrested before the children and adults began speaking about those photos, law enforcement had failed to get a warrant that would authorize a search of his home for such materials. And this part is very eerie. Now, in a bit of a creepy twist, one of those original officers who actually showed up that day to arrest James Rood at his trailer where all this was happening, that officer eventually stated that on that day when he went in to arrest James, he saw a stack of grimy looking video cassettes inside of James' dilapidated home, and a quote large box end quote that appeared to contain porn content and photographs. But because they didn't have that warrant, the officer and the other officers were forced to leave the materials inside of James's home after they arrested him. They couldn't bring those photos or videos that they saw with their own eyes into the station because they didn't have a warrant. And James Rood's parents, who were actually there in the trailer that day on the day of his arrest, they weren't very helpful. They didn't want to help the authorities. In fact, They immediately demanded that the authorities leave the premises, and they weren't friendly. So on the day that James was arrested, his two parents were there. Remember, his parents were accused of participating in these predator parties, and when the parents saw that the police were there to arrest their son, they told the police, "Get the f*** out of here." They didn't want to help at all. But here's the suspicious part. 9 days after James was arrested, after they finally secured the proper search warrant, the Jordan police then executed a search on James Rood's home, only to discover that that stack of tapes and photographs that the officer had previously seen and written down on his report had vanished from the trailer. That's right, you had the officers actually see the proof of these crimes, or what we can, assume is the proof of these crimes, inside of James's trailer. He's not allowed to pick it up, and he's not allowed to bring it into the station because they didn't have a warrant. And then 9 days later, they're gone. Somebody went into the trailer and removed those photographs and video cassette tapes. Could that have been James's own parents who were accused of participating in this sick predator ring as well? Nevertheless, though, the testimony of Violet Kath, Susie Brown, that other child, Lucy Armstrong, and the adult, Marlene Germundson, provided compelling evidence that showed that James Rood had engaged in the act of photographing kids while they were naked. The credibility of Violet and Susie is further reinforced by their independent corroboration of each other's allegations in at least 2 distinct places. They both said that they had been abused in James Rood's trailer, and they also said that they had been at the house of Alvin and Rosemary Rood, James's parents, who were there on the day that James was arrested. Both Violet and Susie told the cops detailed descriptions of the home of Alvin and Rosemary Rood in Shaky, Minnesota. Keep in mind that Shaky is outside of Jordan, it's not in Jordan proper, but these kids were accurately describing what James Rood's parents' house looked like. They even told them what furniture they had in their home, the colors of the house, and more. The 2 girls also told the authorities that James Rood himself had usually abused them in the primary living area of his trailer, as well as on top of his waterbed. The consistent narratives and testimony provided by Violet and Susie showed, in my eyes and in the eyes of the law, that they indeed had been victimized, and that they were indeed reliable witnesses. The following paragraph, taken from the paper about the Jordan, Minnesota cases, is particularly striking. Quote, "How James Rood came to have such extensive access to several children in Jordan is left unexplained in accounts that describe Rood solely as a garbage man. Rood met many of the children babysitting, but it appears that Rood seldom charged money to the mostly single mothers who were willing to leave their children with him. Sometimes he reportedly watched over children in exchange for sex with their mothers, whom he often met at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Other times, the implicit, and probably not so implicit, deal involved Rood obtaining, quote, free access to the children, whose ages ranged from very young through early adolescence. One of these women told police in November of 1983 that she had assumed for months that Rood was sexually abusing her girls, yet she continued to leave her children with him." End quote. So real quickly, I want to make sure that you're following. This all started when those 2 girls were brought into the police station in Jordan, Minnesota, and they started talking about this man, James Rood. Quickly, though, they were interviewed again without the parents in the room, and that's when these allegations really exploded. The girls started talking about their own mothers dating James Rood and molesting them with James. They started talking about the places that they had been brought to in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night. They started talking about being photographed by James, of finding stacks of other photographs featuring other new children in James's trailer. They described the interiors of these places, the furniture inside of these places, even the waterbed that was in James's room that a kid would have no idea was in there if they'd never been in there. And as this was all growing, the web started expanding and news started to get out. All of a sudden, these other kids started talking that their own mother was involved with James and these other mothers. And I think you're starting to get the picture now. This was allegedly a big ring of mothers with James and others that were bringing their own children into this ring to be used and photographed and passed around like toys at these parties. The reasoning, we still don't really understand. Maybe they were deeply in love with James. Maybe these mothers needed money. Maybe these people were just sick in the head. We still don't know. But if you think this is close to the end, the whole thing really hadn't even started yet. Because this case really exploded in the press when a 3rd child was implicated named Joshua Owens, a 10-year-old boy who also lived in the Valley Green Trailer Park, a neighbor of James Rood's. So Joshua first communicated with law enforcement at his own house just a few days after James Rood was arrested. It's unclear why Joshua's father contacted the police on behalf of his son, but the timeline suggests that it's most likely that Joshua's family was aware that their neighbor James had been arrested for victimizing kids. They then asked Joshua if anything had happened to him. He opened up to them, and they then called the authorities. By all indications, Joshua was a local boy whose interactions with James stemmed primarily from the fact that they lived near each other within that Valley Green trailer park. Additionally, James Rood had at one time regularly attended the same Alcoholics Anonymous group that Joshua's mother frequently attended. During interviews on September 30th and October 1st, 1983, young Joshua told the authorities that James Rood had invited him to go camping together on the day they first met. Shortly afterwards, James allegedly photographed young Joshua and his friends from his trailer's front window while the boys played in an adjacent area. So Joshua said he invited him to go camping. Shortly afterwards, he and his friends were playing in the trailer park, and they noticed James taking pictures of them through the window of his trailer. Joshua also told the authorities about an incident that happened at nearby Lagoon Park, a local recreational area, during which James threatened him with a pocket knife and told him to remove his shirt. Joshua described that after this happened, James Rood touched his chest and his and afterwards told him to get with him into this brown-colored vehicle. Joshua remained in the car, and James Rood then drove over and ran into his trailer and retrieved a collection of Playboy magazines and a caged snake. It was alleged by Joshua that James then drove them to nearby Holzer Park, which we're going to visit later in this video, where Joshua claimed that James utilized his pocket knife to cut out the breasts and genitals from the explicit photographs within the Playboy magazines, while at the same time with his other hand, he slowly touched Joshua's chest and his penis. Joshua even said that at one point while they were there in the park, James Rood took the snake out of its cage and held the snake in Joshua's face to intimidate him into going along with the sexual acts. Afterwards, Joshua told the authorities that James Rood took him back to the perimeter of the Valley Green trailer park and threatened both him and his family, and said that if he were ever to speak to anybody about what happened to him, something bad would happen to everybody that he loved. At the end of his initial interview with the police, Joshua expressed relief, yet stated that he was very afraid of James Rood and what he might do to him if he were ever released from custody. Joshua's concern that James might be free one day reflected to investigators a very genuine fear. They could tell that Joshua was very afraid of James. He had trouble relating his story. It was both embarrassing and frightening and really sad for him. And afterwards, when they were talking about, what might happen to James, he was afraid, saying if James ever gets out of prison, he didn't know what would happen to him or his family. But the authorities weren't done speaking to Joshua. On October 18th, 1983, a week or so later, during his third interview, Joshua offered accounts that appear from the outside to border on the realm of the bizarre and almost unbelievable. And this is where some people drop out from this story. They think, oh, there's no way that this is possible. This can't happen. Adults don't do these sorts of things. These predator parties just aren't real. Jeffrey Epstein was innocent, I've really encountered people like that who don't want to believe in this shit. And I don't know if it's like people who don't believe in this stuff are uninformed, willfully ignorant, or, believing in something like this would shatter their worldview. I don't know exactly what it is, but these things were very real. And what Joshua describes next is something that I've heard, coming from so many different places, whether they were these parties described as occurring at the Chateau d'Ameroy, at the Marc Dutroux parties, with the Franklin cover-up, with Frank Sheldon in North Fox Island. You're going to see patterns here that we've seen before, even at the Presidio. Remember that whole video we did? During this third interview, Joshua described an incident during which James Rood forced him into a vehicle and drove him to a blue-gray residence in Shaky, Minnesota, which investigators later showed was most likely James Rood's parents' place, where numerous men and women, adorned in spooky theatrical masks and provocative attire, were holding several children hostage at some sort of bizarre ritual or party. Joshua described two photographers within the group who were, quote, dressed up like Elvis, end quote. These photographers were walking around this party, taking photographs of the people engaging in acts with children and of the kids while they were naked. Joshua also stated that the adults referred to him as, quote, a new toy. with James Rood specifically designating him to the other adults as, quote, my toy. Joshua then alleged that James Rood performed acts upon him within the house and coerced him to pose for photographs with another unidentified female child. Joshua said he didn't know who this young girl was, but the child was nude, and afterwards he said that the two kids were forced to engage in sexual acts with each other. Joshua claimed at one point that the little girl refused to smile as she was being instructed to by the photographer, and for her disobedience, she was brutally whipped. Joshua's narrative of this incident concluded when he said he witnessed that young girl, who's never been identified, receiving an injection that made her drowsy, followed by his own recollection of experiencing a big blackout before he woke up later alone in a wooded area. Joshua, throughout his interviews, described at least 3 additional incidents during which he said that James Rood transported him to secluded wooded locations, molested him, took photographs of him, or forced him to watch as he mutilated Playboy magazines. He asserted that one such incident involved an unknown woman who met James out in the woods, with whom Joshua was forced to engage in sex. The final incident that Joshua described at that time involved being picked up by a group of 3 women who were riding motorcycles, who then delivered him to James and an unidentified photographer. According to Joshua, the group then forced Joshua to perform and receive and be paid by James, while this unnamed phantom photographer took photographs. In each instance, Joshua claimed that James threatened the lives of his family should he talk about what happened to him. When questioned regarding his omission of these incidents in prior interviews, Joshua responded that he was too embarrassed and remained fearful that James Rood might be released and enlist younger individuals to come stalk, hurt, or kill him. It also should be noted that at one point, Joshua described an incident which involved another random man, whom he said was associated with this predator ring, who took pictures of him. And later on, Joshua claimed to have identified the photographer from a photographic lineup at the police station. He put a face to the name. Approximately 1 month later, on a chilly winter day, Joshua accompanied several members of the Jordan Police Department to a wooded area where he alleged James Rood had taken him and repeatedly raped him. After he and the police walked through the woods for a while, they stopped, and Joshua claimed that this is where he remembered James taking him to be molested. And interestingly, there were a few items of note that authorities found in that exact location. Under Joshua's guidance, the officers retrieved an empty soda can, a blanket, and a fragment of plastic sheeting from the area that Joshua identified as having been the area where he had been raped. Joshua stated that on the day that he was molested, he had consumed that soda from the can, and he further alleged that James Rood had employed the blanket during another instance, and that the plastic sheeting had been utilized to conceal a wooden box containing photographs, a camera, and film. Additionally, Joshua told the authorities that James Rood and his, quote, girlfriend had told him and forced him to take pills prior to taking him out to the woods. The box, the photographs, the camera, and the film were never recovered. Joshua was telling the authorities all these crazy things. And when they actually went out to the woods to search the area where Joshua said that these things were happening, the authorities found evidence of habitation. At the exact spot where Joshua said he had been victimized, they found a soda can, a blanket, and some plastic sheeting. Nowhere else in the immediate area did they find anything other than where Joshua said that this had happened to him. So if one of those things is going to corroborate Joshua's story, it really forces you to take a look at everything that he's saying under a deeper, more precise lens. These parties sound way too similar when you consider accounts of victims of the Franklin cover-up and the North Fox Island ring. And especially a story that we've covered a lot on this channel, the Chateau d'Amroy and Marc Dutroux, and all of those sickos that operate in Europe. And keep in mind, Joshua's testimony was recorded by authorities before the graphic and grisly details of the other children's testimonies were made public. So he wasn't just hearing what other kids were saying and spitting it out. These were, in my mind, real things that happened to Joshua. Joshua's subsequent statements have been referenced by members of the media and academic commentators who have characterized the Jordan cases as a witch hunt. That's right, there's a significant portion of people in the media and these scholars who know everything that say that this is nothing more than a witch hunt. So many innocent people's lives were ruined by these lying children. These kids just making up these fantastic stories with no evidence. For instance, a guy named Philip Jenkins portrays Joshua Owens as engaging in, quote, repeated and creative, end quote, falsehoods, and states that, quote, resemblances between Joshua's account and the stereotypes of hardcore pornography will be immediately apparent, end quote. Now, while some of Joshua's statements may seem incredibly bizarre, they can't be completely disregarded, as later on, several of his most remarkable claims were later corroborated, wholly or partially, by at least 2 other children and 1 adult in this case. So Joshua wasn't the only victim who would talk about these things. There were multiple. In fact, 4 of the more unusual details alleged by Joshua were corroborated by other witnesses. Firstly, Joshua's assertion that James Rood had threatened him with a snake appears strange. No other kids throughout the investigation said anything about James Rood having this snake that he, teased children with. However, a different young adult who was involved in the investigation mentioned a comparable detail concerning another implicated adult. Tyler Brown, the biological son of Tom Brown and the stepson of Helen Brown, was interviewed in June of 1984. At 17 years old and having recently returned from active military service, Tyler provided several statements regarding his uncle James, who had been married to Chris Brown, the mother of Susie, who started this whole thing off at the beginning of our story. And as you can see here, just a quick break, all of this is like a big family connection. There's actually like some graphs that show that all these people were interconnected in a familial way. It was these people's nephew and their uncle and their cousin and this guy's whatever. They were all interconnected through these familial bonds, these relationship bonds. So these weren't just random people that the kids were accusing. These people all were in some way related, either socially or through family and blood. But back to Tyler, that young adult. And Tyler's older, so his statements, according to authorities and the public, don't have to be taken with as big of a grain of salt. So Tyler was Christine Brown's stepson. Remember, Christine is the woman who brought Susie in at the beginning of the story and started this whole thing out. And Christine, according to her own daughter and multiple other children, was involved in this predator ring. So Tyler, while he lived with his stepmom, had access to all of the children while they lived together at the Valley Green trailer park. According to Tyler, James Brown, Christine Brown's ex-husband, had been severely towards the kids, including Susie, and had engaged in very strange behavior, such as placing a bed in the center of the living room and requiring the kids to sleep there with him. Additionally, Tyler Brown alleged that James Brown, his dad, quote, maintained an assortment of strange pets, including, quote, rats, tarantulas, snakes, and various peculiar birds, end quote. Tyler stated that James Brown kept these pets for, quote, and related activities, end quote, and that he had observed James Brown threatening the children with snakes and rats. Now, even though Tyler's allegations pertain to James Brown, his own dad, rather than James Rood, and don't directly associate James with snakes, the presence of another story within these kids' testimony of someone threatening a child with a snake is really bizarre, isn't it? Why are 2 different kids talking about adults that are in the same family that threaten kids with snakes? And one of them actually had a snake. Now, also, remember, Joshua stated that James Rood used a gun to threaten him. And people might say, oh, that sounds crazy. Who would do that to a kid? Yet, eerily enough, another kid provided a similar account early on in the investigation. One day prior to Joshua's statement that James Rood had threatened him at gunpoint in Lagoon Park, the Jordan police interviewed another 7-year-old kid from the community, a kid named Brett Landry. Brett, a resident of the, once again, Valley Green trailer park, where James Rood and Joshua lived, and a playmate of the Graham twins, who were allegedly abused by James Rood, was also a friend of Joshua Owens, according to his mother. So Brett, this kid who's 7 years old, has connections to the victims, he has connections to the perpetrators, he lives in the same place where all of this stuff was supposedly going down, and he was good friends with Joshua Owens. Now, Brett, in his interviews with the authorities, made a number of disturbing accusations against, once again, James Rood, including the fact that he witnessed James Rood as he was victimizing other kids. 7-year-old Brett even further described an incident during the summer of 1982, once again at Lagoon Park, during which Brett claimed that James Rood, quote, seized him by his arm and placed a pistol-type gun to his head, end quote. So here, we have 2 different stories of James Rood told by 2 completely different children at 2 different times, stories of him threatening kids with guns at the exact same location, Lagoon Park. And still, there's no corroboration there, according to authorities. But a third fact that was corroborated was even more bizarre. So remember, Joshua claimed that James Rood forced him to take pills so that he would pass out and become almost unconscious during the abuse. And this was corroborated by another kid, Erin Levine, whose younger sister was later interviewed extensively regarding potential abuse, told a very similar story to the Jordan police in April of 1984. Erin Levine, this young kid, described to the authorities multiple instances of abuse that occurred at James Rood's trailer. Incidents which allegedly involved James's own parents, Alvin and Rosemary, as well as Christine Brown, Marlene Germundson, and a woman named Irene Meisinger. Now, Erin Levine, that child, during this completely independent interview, identified Joshua Owens as a kid involved who had been passed around by the adults at these parties. In addition, at one point, Erin Levine, this child, told the investigators that he had been given pills by James Rood that had made him sleepy. Erin also alleged that he wasn't the only one that James Rood had given these pills to, and he even said that James Rood himself took the pills too. He further stated to the authorities that at one point he was forced to consume the pills and was then by Rosemary Rood, James's mother. Although the details of Erin's account regarding these pills are slightly different from those offered by Joshua, the independent corroboration by another child lends some credence to an allegation that might otherwise seem bizarre and implausible. But finally, there's one more detail we have to cover that was corroborated from Joshua's story by other children's accounts. Now, remember, during his story of these predator parties, young Joshua said that he was forced to pose with another young girl. Megan Phelps, the stepdaughter of a woman named Irene Meisinger, who actually Erin Levine had said was involved with this whole predator ring, would come forward on October 15th, 1983. Irene Meisinger herself would later face accusations of numerous children, including her own son and daughter, Jessica and Justin Meisinger. Now, Megan, this victim, recalled visiting James Rood's trailer one day after spending time with her father, her twin brother, her stepmother, and her step-siblings at a nearby lake. While he was at the trailer, Megan alleged that James Rood pulled her onto his lap and touched her breasts and genitals over her clothing, despite her efforts to escape. Megan, this victim's story, was confirmed in a follow-up interview with her twin brother, who reported witnessing his sister sit on James Rood's lap and noting that James Rood had held her down and seemed to be touching her. Jessica Meisinger, another member of the family, also corroborated the account and stated that she had observed James Rood holding Megan on his lap while he kissed her. In her interview, conducted 3 days prior to Joshua Owens' interview where he made these allegations, Megan, the victim, told investigators that at one point, James Rood had showed her a book of photographs that it appeared he had taken, and had asked her whether or not she found them appealing. According to Megan's memory, the photographs showed a young girl and a young boy engaged in mutual touching. Now, Megan's allegations don't fully corroborate Joshua's story, but they align with certain details in a way that reduces the likelihood of coincidence. What are the odds? Days before Joshua makes the allegations that he was forced to pose with this other unidentified young victim at this predator party while they forced them to touch each other and these adults took pictures of them, 3 days before that story is told, another completely independent witness states that they had seen a book of photographs depicting the exact same thing that would be talked about. I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but better start believing it. But those statements made by Joshua gave critics of this whole thing ammunition. They used Joshua's statements to make it seem like this whole thing was a complete fabrication by the young children. A lengthy excerpt from that interview was actually published in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune in October of 1984, and history professor Philip Jenkins highlighted those excerpts in his extensive critique of the case, concluding that, quote, almost all of the testimony that led to 25 indictments on very grave charges was invented, end quote. However, Joshua played virtually no role in the expansion of the case beyond this initial phase. He wasn't implicated in any charges within the second or third waves of arrests, and nearly all charges involving Joshua pertained exclusively to James Rood. Moreover, Joshua is among the 10 children that James Rood himself admitted to abusing after he entered a guilty plea. Even as recently as in 2004, James Rood in the media continued to claim that those charges were true and that he did indeed victimize those children, thereby completely undermining the assertion that Joshua's statements were unreliable and false. The earliest statements from several of the kids, literally their very first or second interviews, acted as a sort of a foundation for more of the arrests in the initial phase. A straightforward examination of the interview sequence over time shows that those arrests and these stories can't be attributed to repetitive or guided interviewing, because the kids weren't repetitively interviewed with leading questions. They gave the responses and told the stories all on their own. That's the whole point that I'm trying to make here. From everything from the preschool cases to the Presidio, people always like to say, back in the 80s, the investigators were completely flawed and they were telling these kids what to say and they were coaching them and they were telling them this and that and making them do this. But that's just not true. In these specific stories and these victims, these kids were brought in and they were interviewed and they gave these responses completely on their own, while the authorities just sat, listened, and wrote everything down. There were no child specialists brought in to, get some answers out of these kids. This wasn't even that big of a deal yet. It was growing into a big deal at the time. So you can't debunk these claims as being, oh, these investigators led the children. They wanted to get what they wanted to hear. Because that's just not what happened. These kids were telling their stories. And then James Rood, the convicted predator, the guy at the center of this whole thing, he admitted that he had victimized these kids, that he had targeted these kids. So he actually corroborated all of their stories by saying, yeah, that stuff's true. So at this point, it was very public news that James Rood had been arrested and that children were beginning to speak of the disturbed ring that existed between James, a group of parents and adults, and the children in Jordan, Minnesota. The original testimony from Susie and Violet inspired others to come forward, and soon 13 additional kids had been interviewed about their involvement in these sick and twisted parties. And everyone in this town was talking about it. I mean, this was a big story. This was unbelievable news. A group of parents in town had been sleeping with their own children, bringing their kids to what appeared to be ritualistic orgies, and taking photographs and videos of all of it. In August 1984, James Rood pled guilty for offenses against 10 child victims in Jordan, Minnesota, and seemingly closed the chapter on this sordid affair. That's right, James Rood didn't even try to fight the charges. He simply pled guilty and acknowledged that he had indeed victimized all of those kids. But it's still unknown exactly how many victims James had in the community, how many children he brought into this shadowy, deeply disturbed spiderweb of abuse. There's no question, though, that James Rood was a serial child molester. Also, I'm sorry that this history is taking so long, but this video took a lot of effort to put together. There's so many pieces here and so much research that needed to be done, and you have to understand this full story to understand the scope of what happened here and what was let go. Remember, at the end of the day, the only person ever convicted of anything in this case was James Rood. None of these parents, none of them went down for anything, even with all of these corroborating details and these stories and the evidence that they found, the evidence that went missing. But we'll talk about that later. The publicly available records in this case definitively show that the authorities had more than enough evidence at the time to make multiple arrests. Marlene Germundson, the second individual who was arrested, was identified as being a offender by both Violet and Joshua. She even admitted to investigators that she had participated in sexual activities, including children. Judith Kath was the third individual arrested. At the time, Judith was engaged to James Rood, and James even told the authorities that the only reason why he had gotten engaged to Judith was so that he could have easy access to her daughter, Violet. James Rood even stated to the police that his fiancée, Judith, had children, including her own blood offspring. But remember, at the beginning of the story, when this whole thing started with that local mother, Christine Brown, bringing her daughter and her friend into the police station, well, Christine was the fourth person arrested in this initial phase, and in contrast to the other people who were arrested, she's been portrayed in the media for some reason as some sort of a victim, the poor innocent victim of some kind of a witch hunt. Some people might believe that narrative, given that Chris was the one who brought the kids into the police at first. A journalist who's extremely familiar with the Jordan cases, who reported on them for 9 months as they were unfolding, didn't depict Christine as a devoted mother. Instead, this reporter asserted that her, quote, primary objective in life was securing a location to leave her children while she pursued external engagements, end quote. All 5 of Christine's children were fathered by different men, with the eldest resulting from a rape perpetrated by her stepfather. Investigative findings later revealed that Aunt Chris had engaged in sexual relations with her own sister's stepson when he was 15 years of age. And the more one learns about Christine Brown, the more plausible it becomes that she agreed to and perhaps actively engaged in the sex of children. A similar inference could be likely drawn regarding James Rood's parents, who allegedly disposed of those photos and video cassettes that were noted by the police during James's arrest, and were in the process of moving away from their trailer at the time of their own arrests. It seemed as though they wanted to get out of the area quick. Robert Rawson was the 7th individual arrested in Jordan. He had lived with Judith Kath, James Rood's fiancée, and the mother of victim Violet, prior to her involvement with James. The charges leveled against Robert Rawson sprung forth from evidence extending well beyond the testimony of children. Statements attesting to sex by Rawson were provided to police by both a 17-year-old male and one of Rawson's own adult daughters. Moreover, the 17-year-old male who came forward with information to authorities about Robert Rawson claimed that he had personally witnessed Robert abusing Violet and Susie, the 2 first victims, neither of whom were old enough to even be considered teenagers at the time. The final individual arrested in this first wave was Irene Meisinger, whose 7-year-old son, Justin, informed officers Noring and Bush that his mother had lowered his trousers and performed on him in the living room shortly before his birthday in July of 1983. At least 2 of the 3 Levine children who gave interviews to the authorities also implicated Irene Meisinger in incidents that occurred at James Rood's trailer in Jordan. And this is what's bizarre. People claim that this was all a witch hunt of some sort, that there was no evidence. But there was evidence. There was plenty of evidence and victim and witness testimony. Hell, James Rood even admitted himself that all of it was basically true. Beyond these nebulous assertions of a witch hunt, to this day, there has been no good argument that has been put forth that would definitively prove that any of these defendants were falsely accused. There's never been a good debunking. They just say, oh, the kids made it up. There's also never been any sort of rebuttal to the specific facts that I just told you. No one's ever tried to refute that stuff. Essentially, the evidence was there. The testimony was there. And yet they called it a witch hunt and tried to convince the public that the perpetrators were the good guys. None of this makes sense at all to me, but it was about to get so much worse, because then came the so-called second wave. The arrests of Tom and Helen Brown signified the start of the subsequent series of arrests in Jordan, and this second wave of arrests caused considerably greater chaos than the first. The New York Times at the time categorized the accused into each wave of arrests as belonging to, quote, 2 separate cohorts, end quote. The initial group, quote, revolved around Mr. Rood and the trailer community, end quote, and the ensuing group, quote, encompassed several established citizens, certain elderly individuals, 2 officers of the law, and various property owners, end quote. So, as you can see right there in that reporting, the media was attempting to paint the second wave of arrests, which involved some more, let's just say, prominent people in the Jordan, Minnesota area, as fake. They tried to make it seem like the first group of arrests dealing with James Rood and his interconnected family of freaks was already questionable, but also that this second group of arrests was more than likely just blatantly false. But this suggestion that the latter group of accused persons was distinctly different than the first group is directly refuted by the intricate network of relationships among the accused, most notably within the broader lineage of the Brown family. In late December 1983, the cases seemed to be slowing down. The snow had settled in Jordan, and with it, the wind had brought upon the town an evil, bone-chilling cold. But like a malevolent zombie rising from the grave, the cases were pushed back into the national spotlight in early January 1984, when a new set of children were brought in for questioning, a process that swiftly culminated with the arrests of Tom and Helen Brown, relatives of Christine Brown, the first woman who brought the 2 kids into the police station at the beginning of this story. These interrogations involved kids who had previously been placed under protective care, Susie and Violet, who had started this whole thing off, as well as minors who were previously completely uncontacted by authorities, such as Jake and Betsy Brown. Jake and Betsy, children themselves, maintained intimate familial links to Susie, as well as social connections to Violet. Because Jake and Betsy were the children of Tom and Helen, Susie was their cousin. Moreover, Helen Brown, who was newly arrested, and Christine Brown, the original mom who started this whole thing off, were sisters. And Tom Brown and Chris Brown's former spouse, James, were brothers. So Judith Kath, who the kids, said earlier on that she was participating in this and she had these parties at her house, her connection to Christine Brown was firmly solidified during that period, with evidence that emerged revealing that she was acquainted with Helen Brown as well. So essentially, as you can tell through this kind of confusing network that I'm talking about, this was a large, interconnected spider web of friendships and family connections. All these people that were accused at this point knew each other very, very well. Tom and Helen Brown were arrested on January 11th, 1984, and the evidence that was gathered to make these arrests came from interviews conducted on January 10th and 11th with multiple different children. The 5 kids interviewed this time included siblings Betsy Brown and Jake Brown. Jake Brown, in his interviews, accused several adults of participating in several serious crimes against children. He even told the authorities that his parents themselves were pedophiles. Jake's testimony also led to the arrests of locals Robert and Louise Bentz on January 20th, and the arrest of a man named Greg Myers on February 6th. During this period, Jake Brown and other kids began to share their stories of dark, sordid gatherings and parties involving sexual activities and games with adults, which implicated a much larger group of individuals as having participated in these things than was first identified. Although some researchers have denied the credibility of these allegations, certain corroboration from other kids and at least one adult, once again, lends a degree of validity to them, in my mind. Now, within the span of just under a month, Jake Brown alleged that there were at least 12 other adults involved in this shadowy network of pedophiles that had been operating in the town of Jordan. The most compelling evidence that he told the authorities pertained to certain defendants from the initial grouping of arrests, alongside stories about Robert and Louise Bentz. Now, even though Jake stated that his parents were involved in these sickening acts, he never flat out accused them of victimizing him. Other kids that were interviewed, though, provided some pretty damning testimony. The interview with Susie Brown, the first girl to make any accusations in this story, on January 10th, 1984, marked the first time that authorities had heard testimony that implicated Tom and Helen in the of children. At that time, Susie, the child, had been residing with foster parents for fewer than 3 months and had undergone 3 prior interviews with the police. And after Susie's interview, the Jordan police initiated contact with several additional kids, whom she had named as being present for the abuse. On January 11th, they questioned Joey Brown, Susie's younger sibling, in addition to Violet Kath, Betsy Brown, and Jake Brown. And each of those kids told the authorities stories of sex, with certain stories implicating Tom and Helen Brown. Susie herself told the cops that both Tom and Helen had abused her, Violet, Jake, Joey, and Betsy. Joey maintained that he alone had been victimized at the hands of Tom and Helen. Violet told the authorities that Tom and Helen had victimized her, Susie, and the Graham twins. Betsy reported that Chris and James Brown had abused Jake and Susie, and further alleged that Tyler Brown, her elder stepbrother, had also victimized her. Betsy additionally told the authorities that her own father had, quote, injured her rear, end quote, and that her mother had advised her, quote, not to be concerned, end quote, regarding Christine Brown's victimization of her own daughter, Susie. Jake Brown came in and reported that Christine Brown had abused Todd Brown and Jill Brown, and also alleged that Tom and Helen might have abused his sister and another kid named Trevor Bentz. It's noteworthy and necessary to state here that multiple children disclosed allegations of abuse at a very early stage of their involvement. The arrests of Tom and Helen Brown were based upon several allegations of offenses against children. From January 10th to 11th of 1984, Susie Brown, Joey Brown, Violet Kath, and Betsy Brown all accused Tom and Helen of abusing at least one or more kids. The children appeared to reference distinct incidents, which we'll talk about in a moment, yet all of them consistently stated that this abuse and these bizarre parties took place at Tom and Helen's house. Although the alleged incidents varied in nature and depravity, each kid told the authorities that Tom and Helen Brown were closely associated with Christine Brown, the mother from the beginning of this story, and her former husband, James, amongst other adults that were later charged with participating in these crimes. Now, in the interviews, Violet and Susie said that they were inside of Tom and Helen's house, and this became a common pattern. As all these kids started talking to the police in the police station, they started noticing that these children were all in some way connected to each other. They were siblings, they were cousins, they were friends, their parents were known to be friends, their parents were related. Some kids were linked socially, some kids lived in the same neighborhood, but all these kids who were testifying, they all had distinct links. And according to these children, they were passed around to different houses where this abuse would take place. Now, even though children can sometimes be influenced during questioning, there's a lot of proof outside of these interviews that these adults did know each other, making these group of claims more believable. On January 12th, in the middle of this hysteria that was taking over Jordan, Minnesota, the young Jake Brown alleged that his elder stepbrother, Tyler Brown, had been his blood sister, Betsy. He further told the authorities that he had been present at a party during which he was touched on his buttocks while in bed. He also referenced a game of spin the bottle, claiming to have witnessed activity between multiple different adults and young children, notably between his stepbrother, Tyler, and the mother, Christine Brown. Lots of these details would go on to be corroborated by other witnesses, including Tyler Brown, who was aged 17 at the time, and Karen Franklin, a neighbor of the Browns, who first got involved with the case that same month in late January 1984. Susie also told the authorities that a spin-the-bottle type game involving various adults and children had taken place in that house during her interview with law enforcement the following day. Susie stated that the adults who ran these predator parties would spin the bottle and afterwards would strike or touch children in a private area when the bottle landed on them. Susie further illustrated her allegations with a sketch depicting the circle of participants. She showed the adults that were there and the children that were there. And these same children that Susie said were there in this drawing would also speak of this same game. Following these initial two interviews, Sandra and Michelle Graham, Betsy and Jake Brown, Joey Brown, and Karen Franklin would all tell the authorities about this version of a spin the bottle game throughout January. They all referenced, all of these children talked about playing this exact same game with, most of the time, the exact same adults. And on January 16th of that month, Tyler Brown, the elder stepbrother, corroborated Jake's statements regarding his own relationship with Jake's sister, Betsy, and lent some credibility to his stepbrother Jake's assertion that adults and children had engaged in inappropriate games. Tyler's interview took place on January 16th and 18th, and said that he had been having relations with his stepbrother, the younger Jake, as well as himself and his stepsister Betsy. At the age of 17, Tyler's statements to the police carried a lot of weight because he was less likely to be swayed by the interview, being a young adult and less like a child himself. And he also shared these intimate, embarrassing, and disturbing details right away in his first talk with the cops. Tyler also mentioned that he had heard rumors about a sexual game that had happened late at night between children and adults. He told the police that the Franklins, who lived near the Browns and had children of their own, had played a version of strip poker with both adults and children there. Prior to this sit-down interview with the police, Tyler had entered into an agreement with law enforcement to participate in a rehabilitation program outside of Jordan. So it remains unclear to people who look into this how or why Tyler would have had any motivation to exaggerate his allegations. Also, two of Tyler Brown's principal allegations, that he had his stepbrother Jake, and of these rumors of this strip poker game at the Franklin's residence, had been previously talked about by his brother Jake in an interview earlier that day. So at this point, Tom and Helen Brown and their children, and the other people that they married throughout their lives, their children, their stepchildren, they're all talking about how Tom and Helen, these other local parents, were involved in throwing these predator parties. And they're linked to the original cluster of people who were throwing these parties. But young Jake Brown's early statements to the police weren't enough to prove that his parents, Tom and Helen, should be arrested. But by mid-January, the cops had good reason to believe that both Jake and his sister Betsy had been the Scott County Sheriff's Office had been told by multiple witnesses at that point that both Jake and Betsy had been repeatedly raped, and that it would have been tough for Tom and Helen to claim that they didn't know that this was going on, as they were at times the ones accused of doing it. Kathleen Morris, the prosecutor at the time, moved fast. She started with the Browns, and she arrested people as soon as one kid reported abuse and another backed it up, charging everyone mentioned even if they hadn't confirmed the allegations yet. Kathleen's thinking at the time, that she publicly stated, was that this quick-fire series of arrests provided a fast and certain protection for the kids, like what we do with previously convicted sex offenders, but it also risked wrongful arrests and weak charges that could have potentially hurt families. Kathleen Morris, though, said to the media at the time that keeping kids safe was her #1 priority. Kathleen stated that she couldn't base Jake's charges against his parents, Tom and Helen, just on what he had told police, and that the eventual charges against them actually came from Susie's words instead. So you can see a pattern here. The local authorities weren't really ready to make an arrest based on a single allegation. They were waiting, ready to strike, for the moment when a child made a second accusation against a perpetrator. Then they would swoop in, make the arrest, and continue the interviews. This tale took a dramatic twist when the arrests of Tom and Helen Brown started the onset of a second series of arrests in Jordan. But the arrests of Tom and Helen Brown were just the tip of the iceberg, and they really just kicked this whole series of arrests off. And this time, all these arrests and these allegations were way more controversial because they were televised and published nationwide. There was broadcast television coverage of these cases, broadcast from coast to coast in America. These arrests and this affair was written about in every local newspaper across the United States, and people started tuning in and paying attention to what was happening in Jordan, Minnesota. At first, there were only 8 arrests, and nobody really talked about those 8 arrests with James Rood and the original group of parents at the trailer park. In fact, I can't really find any coverage online about those arrests. There's no news report that I could find. There was barely any newspaper coverage, but this time it was a big story. And that's possibly because the county attorney and the prosecutor, Kathleen Morris, had alerted the media about this ring scandal that was unfolding in Jordan. This public spectacle sparked an uproar. On Monday, January 16th, roughly 24 citizens stormed a Jordan City Council session, voicing their frustration with Kathleen Morris's conduct. Among them, a resident named Robert Bentz demanded, "For what reason does Morris summon the press?" as recorded in reports. And ironically, within days, by week's end, Robert Bentz and his spouse, Louise, found themselves ensnared in the same net, charged with the sexual maltreatment of minors. The notion that the Bentzes might have participated in these parties at Tom and Helen Brown's residence wasn't implausible, given their position as their literal immediate neighbors. That's right, they lived directly next door to the Browns. And because of the fact that they were direct neighbors, we have to give the allegations against them a serious look. The initial indictments against the Bentzes weren't the only charges that they would receive. Consistent with the evolving nature of the Jordan proceedings, the claims against the Bentzes grew over time, culminating in 12 further counts of sexual misconduct being leveled against them by late July, with allegations coming from an additional 5 more juveniles. Originally, the Bentzes were alleged to have molested their own children, along with Susie, Jake, and Betsy, while playing a perverse version of hide and seek, during which the participants allegedly removed their clothing and committed sexual acts. These allegations stem mainly from interviews with young Jake Brown, who was first questioned on January 11th regarding the maltreatment by his own parents, Tom and Helen. Jake offered critical insights about the Bentzes on January 16th and 20th, during his 3rd and 4th interview with the authorities. Susie's testimony on January 20th provided more evidence against the Bentzes, and according to legal filings, even though Jake and Susie were related, they hadn't spoken for at least a month before they were independently interviewed, interviews in which they unveiled very similar accusations of abuse. And the stories that Susie and Jake told the authorities were disturbing. The assertions by Susie and Jake concerning hide-and-seek activities could be perceived as outcomes of repeated interrogations. However, these allegations were repeated by other children. 5 days after the Bentzes were arrested, Joey Brown also referenced a hide-and-seek game. And most notably, Karen Franklin, a 12-year-old neighbor who was completely uninvolved in the case up until this point, shared a pretty disturbing story with the police on February 6, 1984, during her second encounter with officials. In her prior session on January 27th, she had described a pedophile games that were played at Tom and Helen Brown's house. Games like Spin the Bottle, musical chairs, and tag. Games that had been flipped on their heads and turned into disgusting entertainment. For example, Karen Franklin stated to the authorities that when she played tag with other children and adults at the Browns' house during these parties, the children would begin by running away from the adults, who would then give chase. According to Karen Franklin, after a child was tagged by an adult, they would be forced to remove their clothing and were then taken into a nearby room. During her interview, she also explicitly identified a Luis and Bob and Greg as participants in these games of tag and hide and seek at the Browns' home. Luis and Robert Bentz's own children eventually alleged that they had also been forced to take part in these same sickening hide and seek games, even though these allegations only surfaced months later. At this point, the prosecution's case rested upon 3 different children who all came from distinctly different households, who had all told the cops strikingly similar, down to every last detail, testimonies about these games that were played between adults and children at the house of the Browns. Games which implicated the Browns' neighbors, Bob and Luis Bentz. And at this point, it was time for the Bentzes to face trial for the crimes that they had allegedly committed and allegedly helped to commit against children. The prosecution faced major problems before and during the trial, making the case more dramatic and helping the defense in the end. The first issue was the fact that they lost James Rood's testimony. James Rood, the original man accused of molesting children in the town of Jordan, was supposed to be the adult that the prosecution counted on, who would make the children's statements more believable, who would help to corroborate their stories. But when it came down to it, he couldn't point out who Robert Bentz was in court, so his testimony, all of it, was dropped. I want you to keep that in mind. All of his testimony was dropped and was deemed unusable in court, even though the theory is that James was one of the brainchilds who ran this entire operation. They dropped all of his testimony and said he cannot testify in court. So if that doesn't reek of cover-up, I don't know what does. If there's smoke, there's fire. It seems to me more like they found a way that they could get James's testimony and everything to be dropped and unusable. The second problem came from a legal disagreement that cut down and limited what could and couldn't be said in court. Both defendants, Robert and Luis, in the Bentz case, were charged with helping each other commit crimes, and the prosecutor thought that this meant they could bring in evidence about the Bentz's ties to other accused people. Instead, the judge, in what reporter Bruce Rubenstein called a confusing decision, ruled that they could only help each other, which helped to block any and all evidence that may have been presented that would demonstrate to the jury the existence of a wider ring. This let the defense call the ring idea ridiculous out loud in court, as they knew that the prosecution couldn't show any proof or evidence that they had gathered that showed that any other adults were involved in this. Basically, the defense was allowed to just shit on the ring allegations. They were allowed to laugh and scoff at the theory, and the prosecution wasn't allowed to present any evidence that would demonstrate that the ring was indeed real. And that makes no sense to me. This is a huge case, and it's obvious that these kids are testifying that these two were involved with multiple other perpetrators, and they actually ruled that they couldn't talk about the other people that were involved, that they had to stick between allegations just against them, which is so bizarre. And add into there the fact that James Rood's testimony was completely dropped. It definitely reeks of a cover-up. But even with those roadblocks, Kathleen Morris, the prosecutor, believed that she had a solid case. She had statements from 5 different children, including 2 of the Bentz's own kids. It's hard to tell from just taking a look at the court records how these kids were shown to the jury or how they handled tough questioning, but sadly, their main testimony came from yes or no questions that were asked of them. Questions that kept their answers clear and definitive, but also questions that didn't allow them to really openly talk about their experiences or allegations, which caused the court and jury to miss out on those graphic and disturbing details that showed the real experiences that the children had. It's like asking these kids, so, were you a Yes. Are you sure that that happened? Yes. Were you a by him? Yes. They're not asking these kids, what did they do to you? And letting these kids talk about all of these things. It's really bizarre. The defense's questioning of the children was also incredibly harsh, with one reporter saying it, quote, hit the kids hard, leaving them upset and mixed up, end quote. John Cruzden, a reporter from the New York Times who was present in the courtroom, noted that many of the children themselves got physically sick after testifying. They were questioned so hard, bullied by the defense, that they actually got physically ill. Judge Lynn Olson was shocked by the records and told defense attorney Rubenstein that his questioning towards the children was rude, pushy, and repetitive. Her later commission that investigated this whole thing found that this questioning was incredibly hard on the Bentz case kids, which ended up backing prosecutor Kathleen Morris's original view that stopping the case was the only way to shield the children from more courtroom harm. Some people blamed Kathleen Morris for not fighting the defense more, while she, in the same breath, pointed blame at the judge for not protecting the kids enough. Either way, the trial's strain made parents, therapists, and prosecutors wonder which kids, if any, could face more trials. It was an absolute nightmare, a bloody massacre. How the kids were treated in this specific trial, in fact, might explain the whole Jordan case falling apart more than anything else, though you won't see that in the witch hunt stories and made-up narratives of total innocence. People also said that the prosecution hurt itself by not questioning some defense witnesses, like the Bentzes or expert Ralph Underwager, a debated psychologist new to defending cases, whose background could have been challenged. But despite these issues, the prosecution had clear strengths. It relied on 5 kids as testimonies, 3 who were over the age of 10. To Kathleen Morris, who thought one believable child's word could win a case, this was a ton of proof. Another boost came when the youngest Bentz child spoke during defense questioning. And this example is absolutely egregious. On that day in the courtroom, the Bentz child was on the stand. When the young 6-year-old saw his parents walk into the courtroom that day, he smiled at them and waved his hand. Keep in mind, this child was 6 years old, and thinking that he saw blood in the water, he saw this kid who was supposedly victimized smiling at the perpetrators. The defense lawyer for the Bentzes then asked the 6-year-old boy, and this is a direct quote, "You're not scared of your dad putting his peener in your butt, are you?" End quote. The young boy then turned and looked directly at his father and yelled out to the court, "He won't do that anymore, right?" This showed both a hope and a deep pain, a real trauma that the child had suffered that the defense just couldn't brush off. The case got even stronger when the defense team performed psychological tests on the Bentzes, the 2 who were accused, and the state's experts said that the results of those tests showed that the Bentzes weren't being honest. Whether this proved guilt or not, it showed that there was real evidence against them. This wasn't a wild witch hunt by any means. The state would have been wrong to ignore it all. And then came the final day of the trial. After 3 days of talks, with mistrial rumors growing, the jury, 8 men and 4 women, walked out into the courtroom to deliver their verdict. Not guilty.
Not guilty.
They said on each and every charge. It's unclear to this day if the jury actually thought that the Bentzes didn't do the things that they were accused of doing, or if they felt that the prosecution just didn't prove them enough. Afterwards, Kathleen Morris, the prosecutor, said that the system had let the kids down, and this was a bad sign for all of the other upcoming trials. If they couldn't get 1 conviction, how are they going to get over 20? After the Bentzes walked free, the other cases hit big trouble. After his blowout in the courtroom, serial James Rood's confession was banned from being included in 2 more upcoming trials. And at the time, no one knew if they'd ever be able to bring it back. It was also unclear to the prosecution just how the kids would handle more trial stress. Would it be as rough as the Bentz case? Because it had already been a bloodbath in the courtroom, with aggressive lawyers trying their hardest to tear the words of the children to shreds. These lawyers were literally getting up there, belittling the children, telling them that they were lying, making them seem like frauds and con children. And if so, if the kids couldn't survive another brutal round of questioning, how exactly would that affect who could testify? The narrative of the Jordan cases took a significant turn when a man named Greg Myers became the 14th individual formally accused. Greg Myers, a police officer in Jordan, maintained a very notable social bond with Tom and Helen Brown, the supposed hosts of these predator parties. The accusations against Greg originated from testimonies provided by 2 of the Browns' children, Jake and Betsy, alongside testimony from that 11-year-old local girl, Karen Franklin, the neighbor of the Bentzes and Browns. Jake and Betsy Brown told the authorities that police officer Greg Myers had inappropriately touched their private areas during a stay at the nearby Quarry campground in the summer of 1983. In prior discussions with investigators, Jake had identified Greg as a friend of his parents, though it was only now that he told them that he had him. Karen Franklin, the neighbor girl, claimed that Greg had ensnared her during a game of tag and had her during one of the many game nights at the Brown residence. Now, interestingly, upon his arrest, Greg admitted to the authorities that yes, he had indeed camped out at Quarry Campground at around that same time period, and that yes, he did frequent the Browns' home for card games and social gatherings. But in the same breath, he adamantly rejected the allegations that he was a predator and insisted time and time again that his arrest stemmed unjustly from his friendship with Tom and Helen Brown. The accounts delivered by Jake Brown, Betsy Brown, and Karen Franklin emerged during interviews conducted early in February of 1984, and Greg was arrested on February 6th. Karen Franklin, at the time, had undergone only one prior interview in January, before her second in early February with her mother present within earshot. During this interview, she once again went into graphic and disturbing detail about several instances of games involving adults and children that were played at the residence of Helen and Tom Brown during 1982 and 1983. According to the official report, all of these activities, quote, entailed an adult escorting a child into a room and committing assault, end quote. Karen identified two adult males, George Gibbons and Greg Myers, as having injured her during these games. She described Greg as a Jordan police officer and alleged that he had engaged in with her on multiple occasions within these activities. She further reported that Greg had, quote, threatened her life, end quote, should she reveal the incidents. Her statement was comprehensive and appeared credible on the surface. Indeed, it aligned seamlessly with earlier disclosures by the Brown children regarding those games that took place at their home, allegations which were not public at the time. And interestingly, while Karen's allegations didn't directly corroborate Jake and Betsy's claims about Greg, she was discussing events at the Brown house rather than at the Quarry Campground. They did corroborate various claims made by the Brown siblings about those adult-involved games that supposedly took place at their residence. Karen's allegations also lend credence to the notion that Greg Myers may have been additional evidence that Greg may have raped other children arises from the testimony of Joanna Lennox, another minor, whom Greg actually acknowledged encountering at the Quarry Campground in the summer of 1983. In her testimony, Joanna alleged that Greg touched her breasts, buttocks, and area underwater while they were out swimming in the nearby lake. Joanna stated that quickly after she was touched inappropriately by Greg, she immediately headed towards her mother for protection to avoid him, citing a general discomfort. It was proven later on that the Lennox family, along with numerous adults and children later implicated in the Jordan arrests, had indeed been present at the Quarry Campground on those same dates that same summer. After being arrested, Greg Myers waived his right to legal representation and consented to questioning. He confirmed being friends with Tom and Helen Brown, a friendship that spanned 3 to 4 years and involved card playing at their home and attendance at a single beer gathering. He also confirmed camping at the Quarry Campground alongside the Browns, their children, and various other juveniles. However, he continued to deny any misconduct or instances of being alone with a child during these outings. Further, he claimed he had no idea who Karen Franklin was. At one point, he was even so confident in his innocence that he agreed to a polygraph test. Yet, after failing certain questions and demonstrating signs of dishonesty, the outcome of this test proved to be unfavorable to his defense. Charles L. Yeshke, the polygraph test technician, concluded that Greg was not forthcoming in 3 critical instances, including a question directly questioning his denial of contact with individuals under the age of 18 at Tom and Helen Brown's residence. The report additionally noted that Greg Myers, quote, deliberately introduced distortions, quote, in an evident effort to confound, end quote, the people running the test. While this does not conclusively validate the allegations, it does cast significant doubt on Greg Myers' stories, and at that time did form a basis for pursuing charges against him. So if you're innocent, why are these people all failing polygraph tests? I know that this, it's a flawed science to some, but now you have multiple people failing the polygraph tests and showing deception, especially when you come to Greg's case, specifically when you're dealing with the allegations that he had molested children under the age of 18, to the point where the technician actually gave an interview saying, it wasn't telling the truth fully. 1 failed polygraph test. Weird, still. I'm still going to say it's weird. I'm not in the camp where it's like, oh, that's bullshit, throw it out. But 2, Greg Myers faced charges of 3 kids, all 3 at the Brown residence, and the Brown kids, though not Karen Franklin, at the Quarry Campground. None of the accusations involved his own offspring, nor did they initially implicate his wife, Jane. Such claims surfaced months later during the third phase of arrests. The saga of the Jordan cases reached its climax with the detention of Marlene Germundson on March 31st, marking the final arrest of that second wave. A lull of nearly 2 months ensued before a flurry of activity saw 8 additional individuals ensnared within a fortnight, heralding the onset of a third series of arrests. This final wave bore an inherent air of suspicion from the outset. In contrast to the preceding phase, which had commenced with testimonies from juveniles previously unexamined, the third chapter relied almost exclusively on declarations from children who had already undergone numerous interrogations. Furthermore, the affiliations amongst these accused people weren't as clear as those in the past. In late January 1984, several kids who were questioned regarding their encounters with Tom and Helen Brown all independently identified Greg Myers as having been a part of the Predator Ring. Jane Myers, his wife, however, remained unmentioned in those early interviews, nor did her name surface in interviews conducted throughout February, March, or April of that year. Yet by May 1984, investigators concluded that Jane Myers was guilty, and on May 25th, she faced 8 charges linked to 4 minors. These accusations carried an immediate veneer of doubt. Winter 1984 had seen a plethora of interviews addressing Greg Myers' participation in gatherings at the Brown residence, yet no one mentioned Jane until months later. According to official records, Alex Myers, one of the 2 children of the accused Greg and Jane, was the first to implicate their own mother, Jane, in acts of sexual conduct, doing so on May 3rd, 1984. And his sibling, Anna Myers, made very similar allegations the following day when she was interviewed by the police. The children had been removed from their household months before and had been questioned multiple times already, but it was only at this point when they began to tell their stories. Both kids began making these allegations while working with their therapist, a man named Tom Price, and in the presence of police officials. Now, Anna's first statements to Detective Pint on May 4th need to be looked at alongside what therapist Tom Price was doing. In February, when the children's dad, Greg, was charged with Anna and her brother were taken from their home, put into foster care, and sent to Tom Price for therapy. Taking the kids away seemed odd since their mother, Jane Myers, wasn't charged with the crime at the time, and Greg was already in custody. This mistake might have pushed officials to find reasons to charge Jane too. Even without that, Price, paid by the state, probably had ideas about what happened since the kids were removed. The Myers family challenged Tom Price's therapy skills, but he was key in getting both kids to say things against Jane in his office. Later, a lawsuit showed worrying details about how Anna's claims to Pint came up. They matched what she'd told Price before. Kids often tell therapists about a first, which is fine, but in court, Tom Price, the therapist, admitted that he'd pushed Anna with her brother's story about their mom, even though he said he didn't lead kids on. That push made 5-year-old Anna feel she had to agree with her brother, so her May 4th words were likely shaped by the therapist's pressure. He and other therapists got tangled up in the case, working with police so much that therapy turned into questioning. Big statements from kids only came after lots of sessions, and sometimes therapists spoke for the children themselves. In the Buchanan case later on, the state used therapists' words instead of kids to prove a The third wave of arrests didn't just happen after therapists joined. It relied on them getting kids to talk in ways that made those statements hard to trust. So the final arrests in this whole saga centered around Donald and Cindy Buchanan, a married pair, each indicted on June 6, 1984, with 22 counts of 4 kids. Anna and Alex Myers, the children of Greg and Jane, who were also accused, and their own daughters, Maggie, aged 4, and Caroline, aged 2. Donald Buchanan, a 12-year veteran of the Scott County Sheriff's Department, and his wife, employed by the Carver County Attorney's Office, were not related to the other accused parties in any way. Their sole social linkage to the other people accused here was that Greg and Jane Myers had served as babysitters for their children at one point. The Buchanans were arrested on June 4th, and their children were promptly taken into state custody. 2 police reports that we can now view explain why the Buchanans were arrested. Detective Pint's supplemental report sums up May 30th interviews with Anna and Alex Myers, with just one sentence about the Buchanans. It said, Anna said Don Buchanan hurt her, but Cindy Buchanan didn't harm kids. Now, Special Agent Patrick Shannon's brief June 4th information report says Anna, Alex, and Maggie Buchanan told him Donald Buchanan had contact with them, with no extra details given. These reports raise red flags. Anna said that Cindy didn't hurt kids, yet Cindy was charged for harming Anna on June 6th, which doesn't match. The May 30th statements came from a session to prep Anna for court, run by prosecutor Kathleen Morris, not a regular investigation, which is odd since Anna had already had 10 prior interviews without mentioning the Buchanans once. The Buchanans get one line in a 2-page report, hinting that she might have been led to say it, not that it came up naturally, and it's weak proof. Plus, Alex was told about their sibling Anna's claims and asked to just agree with them, making his statement less his own and more formed by her words. A June 7th report gives more from Anna and 2 Buchanan kids about the Buchanans and others. It notes that somebody helped the therapist, Tom Price, question 3 kids, with Tom Price, the therapist, asking them most questions to keep them comfy, but he also mixed therapy with police work. Therapists help kids, not dig for facts like investigators, who should question everything, not just believe it. Officer Shannon's 3-page report ends with him talking to Tom Price, the therapist, who said he had no doubt the kids told the whole truth. Now, that kind of certainty isn't necessarily how investigators should think. It's more like cheering for the kids than checking the facts, which then led to the charges against Jane Myers and the Buchanans, based on very shaky statements. The therapist-led interview records are summaries, not full transcripts, so it's almost impossible to this day to check questions or answers that were asked or provided. Some solo therapy sessions with the kids were taped, like one on June 4th, recorded with one of the young Bentz children. A recording that showed investigators and therapists employing bad methods. The recording starts with the investigator asking, "Who touched your?" Then the investigator undresses a doll before the young boy speaks, saying, "This is a baby doll, let's pretend," mixing playtime with legitimate investigation. The rest uses yes or no questions, assuming, and when the boy says, "My dad didn't do anything, he was at work," the investigator asks, "Who else touched you?" completely ignoring that denial. This investigator in specific seemed eager to get specific answers, not to explore, and the boy gave short replies. These tapes show that children in this phase of the arrests were pushed. They weren't questioned fairly, and yet this was provided as evidence to help arrest the Buchanans. On his arrest date, Donald Buchanan spoke willingly, waving a lawyer, telling an investigator, "You've got a big issue with these stories." Offered a deal, he said, "There's nothing there, plain and simple," sticking to that without any interest in offers. He insisted that he'd face the claims anytime because they're totally false. That's a quote. It should be said here that denials don't prove much, since abusers obviously often lie, but Donald's response wasn't defensive or downplaying. The Buchanans chose to have a family court trial within 90 days of being in custody, a trial that was eventually held from August 28th to September 19th, 1984 in Scott County, and it showed deep, glaring flaws in the charges, gaps in the testimony, lies from the children, and the entire thing was dropped a month later. After Jane Myers' arrest, they had their oldest daughter checked by a doctor and Scott County investigators for signs. Actions Judge Young called voluntary, but doctors found no signs of. During the trial, none of the Buchanan kids testified in court. Only therapists spoke for them. Judge Young dismissed this, finding records full of leading questions to the Buchanan kids, who were only aged 2 and 4 during their questioning. And at the end of the day, the court found no clear proof that the Buchanans had their children. The charges seemed rushed, based on a court preparation talk by Kathleen Morris, where, on video, one of the young children confirmed a twisted version of the other child's words that weren't true in the first place. The Buchanan kids had been taken from their parents and were gone for months, repeatedly questioned all the while. The Buchanans' criminal trial was set to take place after the Bentzes, but all of their charges were dropped, along with the charges of every other person arrested or accused in this case on October 15th, 1984. However, there is still one more disturbing twist yet to come. The tale of the Jordan cases really reached its most infamous peak from July 9th to September 27th, 1984, a period etched in memory when several kids voiced chilling accounts of an infant or infants being tortured, mutilated, and murdered. Investigative records reveal a session on July 11th with Jake Brown, conducted by Detective Pint, where he spoke of a, quote, mulatto infant, end quote, who was, quote, gravely wounded and, quote, dashed against a tree. On July 16th, 2 therapists joined Detective Pint and Shaky's Earl Fleck to question Jake again, during which he claimed the, quote, mulatto child was, quote, stabbed in the abdomen, bled profusely, and buried in the forest near the Bentz home, end quote. 2 days later, on July 18th, Jake was interviewed again, with this particular interview now deemed the most notorious throughout this entire case. The police report opens with, quote, Jake revealed in this discussion the presence of 3 or 4 corpses, end quote. Notably, therapists cautioned law enforcement against taking these claims at face value, yet Kathleen Morris deemed them serious enough to act, and before July's end, she led Jake and a group of officials into the woods in the area around Jordan, looking for the graves of these ritualistically murdered babies. However, they found nothing. Jake later pointed to a rock that they'd seen as a possible burial site for the mulatto victim, though no physical proof has ever emerged. This suspected death inquiry involved 10 children, with Jake questioned 7 times, including the forest trip, and 5 others who also alleged that there were murders that took place that last year. That's right, 5 other children also testified and alleged that they had witnessed babies being murdered in the woods and river area around Jordan, Minnesota. They had testified that these murders were done in a ritualistic fashion by groups of adults, and at least one victim even stated that they were forced to drink the blood of the infant by the murderers. And the children were terrified. It was palpable. You could see that these kids were horrified, according to these investigative reports, and that for some of these kids, getting this off of their chest was a relief. This probe into the suspected deaths produced 126 pages of investigative documents, as authorities investigated the alleged murders of these babies, mostly drafted in the month before the Bentz trial. But despite a defense request for exculpatory materials, these pages were withheld from Bentz's defense team. Their existence surfaced only on the trial's 8th day via cross-examination, when a child who was being examined mentioned an officer's notes. Judge Martin Mansour reviewed these documents privately, and Kathleen Morris, the prosecutor, argued that they had to keep this quiet as it was a, quote, confidential, ongoing murder probe, end quote. And feeling a bit of concern himself, Judge Martin Mansour ruled to protect those notes, ordering the deputy to share only parts of the notes that were directly tied to claims. In contrast, Judge John Fitzgerald, who oversaw the Buchanan case, issued a broader order on October 10th, mandating that all notes, including the murder claims, be given to the defense. Things at that point were at an absolute fever pitch in Jordan, Minnesota. There were dozens of victims that had come forward, over a dozen people accused of being in a ring, rumors of a murderous cult-like ring operating in town, and now the possibility that babies were being mutilated, murdered, and buried in the woods and thrown into the local rivers. But they never found anything. In the heat of all this pressure, though, something extraordinary happened. 5 days after all the notes were ordered to be released to the defense in the Buchanan case, on October 15th, 1984, prosecutor Kathleen Morris seized all remaining prosecutions and dropped all remaining charges, citing 2 key reasons: preserving a, quote, significant ongoing criminal inquiry, end quote, and sparing the children further stress from trials. The former dominated news and later writings, unsurprising given its sensational implication that there were actually undetected murders linked to these charges. Whether Kathleen Morris truly believed infants were murdered in Jordan, Minnesota remains unclear, but the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, with FBI aid, investigated after the charges had all been dismissed and found no reliable evidence for murder claims. And obviously, as we all know, who's more trustworthy than the FBI to tell us the truth about something like that? Right. Obviously, that's a joke. If you still trust the FBI and the CIA, one good book to read is The Franklin Cover-Up or The Franklin Scandal. That will shatter your trust in those institutions. And I do not trust the FBI at all when they would say this. The FBI has been used hundreds, thousands of times to complete cover-ups here in America. And that's what this seems like it is. The FBI comes in at the very end to put a stamp on the whole thing and say, nope, no one was ever killed. But let me just play you a clip right now from a news report. Here are some women talking about being in a satanic cult who were actually bred and breeding babies to be given to be sacrificed by this cult. This is real. These people are real from what I can tell and from the research I've done into this clip. Take a look.
As sickening and unbelievable as it sounds, bearing children for use in satanic rituals may really be happening.
My daughter, who I named Wendy, was sacrificed at birth with an upside-down cross and then taken outside and buried. My son, they kept and let live till 2 years old, and then he was sacrificed.
Michael and I had a son, and he was dedicated to Satan at birth. And at 6 months of age, he was sacrificed to Satan.
It is most common for the heart to be taken from the child and offered to Satan.
These women say they speak from personal experience. They claim to be breeders, forced by covens to bear children, both as a way for the cults to get new members and to find fresh victims for ritual murder.
Did you give birth to infants who were sacrificed?
My first two.
Were sacrificed?
Were sacrificed. I was told it was the highest honor I could ever do as a woman, was to sacrifice my first two.
And you did that?
I was so brainwashed, I believed their philosophy.
Jackie tells us she was able to escape her satanic cult. Today she helps other women, like Donna, who are trying to break free.
You killed your babies?
Take the skin off.
You skin the baby? You take the baby's skin off? Do you feel remorse? Have you told the police?
I had to do what I had to do, or I'd be killed like the babies that they made me want killed, and that they put in my hand. They said, "Obey, or this is you."
Jackie, you have some pictures drawn during the therapy sessions by the people who've been through this. Why don't you show me some?
This picture is a person remembering skinning children and babies and hanging it out to dry. Taking the skin off alive while they are alive and skin them until they die.
And that's how your babies died?
They took a little patch about 3 by 4 off of her stomach, skinned her, and said, "We'll skin you all the way if you talk or cry." You learn not to cry real fast.
I don't cry.
But with no victims found, no physical traces of murder, kids that said they had witnessed babies being murdered faced severe credibility hurdles, which, in the eyes of prosecutors, would most likely render them ineffective witnesses. A later commission that was formed to analyze this entire thing, called the Olson Commission, noted that 11 of 21 pending cases relied on the testimony of children who had testified about seeing babies being murdered. And this, in their eyes, gave strong grounds to drop those charges, given criminal proof standards, even if earlier statements were believable and backed up. But this logic then raises a vital question about the 10 other cases based on children's testimony who never claimed they were present for the murders in the first place. The Olson Commission found dismissing these cases to have been the most troubling. The commission even lamented in their final official report that they felt that children were, quote, left behind, end quote, where prosecutions should have continued. Kathleen Morris's second reason, shielding the kids from further courtroom drama, gained little attention beyond a chapter in John Crewsden's 1988 book By Silence Betrayed, yet it stood on solid ground, unlike her investigation claim. Evidence abounds that the children who testified during the Bentz trial endured intense amounts of stress and trauma. Bruce Rubenstein noted their brutal defense assaults, and guardian ad litem Diane Johnson testified that at least 3 of the children were so emotionally shaken from the way that the trial played out and the way that the adults in the trial treated them that they were unable to continue. They were physically sick, they were in pain, and they had serious bouts of mental turmoil. Additionally, and shockingly, before the next set of trials, Judge Jack Mitchell, who was presiding over the next upcoming 5 trials, ruled that the children, before each trial, could be legally subjected to over 24 pretrial hours of examination by defense attorneys and 6 different psychological evaluations. Can you imagine what that would have done to those kids? Before each trial that they had to participate in, they could have been subjected to a full 24 hours over a period of however many days of examination by the defense, which I'm assuming would have been brutal and demeaning. And they could have been forced to sit through 6 different psychological evaluations. I see this as extreme corruption in a way. This whole thing was a tool used by the state of Minnesota or the corrupt players within the state of Minnesota's government to force the hand of the victims, a way to shut these stories down before they could fully be told. Who's going to put their child up against that? They have to testify in, let's say, 5 upcoming trials. They rule that you can, have this 24 hours of interrogation. So 24 times 5, that's 120 hours of interrogations by defense attorneys who are looking to poke a hole in your story, who are looking to shut you down. In addition to these 6 psychological evaluations before each trial. No one would want to put their kids through that. No one would really even want to put a child through that. I mean, it's horrible. It's torture in its own way. So in my opinion, that was something that was done to prevent these kids from talking. You see methods like this in all these stories, ways that governments keep people silent. This is just another one of those ways. And this whole thing was convenient. This was part of the reason why Kathleen Morris dropped all of the charges. And so at the end of the day, the only person held accountable for any of these crimes was the one man who started it all. James Rood. Even though there were mountains of corroborating evidence and stories, deeply disturbing testimonies from reliable witnesses, positive identifications, details about the interiors of homes and buildings that the children shouldn't have known that they provided, photographs and video evidence that were seen by the police but disappeared, other records that disappeared, alleged perpetrators confirming that they were at the crime scenes at the same times as alleged crimes, and hell, some of the adults, let me remind you, even admitted to their own children and allowing their children to be they admitted that to the police. But every single charge got dropped and completely covered up. And this is the part that really pisses me the fuck off. Many in the wake of the trials and this entire affair have called this a witch hunt. But that moniker and designation is completely unfounded. There were dozens of real children who were really here by a very real ring that could have potentially murdered children. And yet only one person was held accountable. That's the fucking American justice system for you. Completely flawed in every single possible way. It's hard to believe that all of those charges were dropped. They didn't want to take a look at anybody's case in specific or actually try to proceed with charges against any of those people. They just dropped it and moved on. And these are people who had multiple children testifying later. Them. Even their own kids saying, my mom forced me to do this, or my mom brought me here to do this, and describing the interiors of these locations. It's clear that these people were involved in this ring and that there was an organized ring here going on. And yet nothing. Let alone all the kids and adults who testified about all these CP photographs and videos that they seen, all the different people that were said to have been involved, even thinking about all the stories of the children, these parties with the masks and the things that they were doing, and who else could have been involved, who was never even identified, whose identities were completely covered up. When I first read this through and examined the evidence for myself, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that every single charge was just suddenly and out of nowhere dropped. Somebody had to have been paid off somewhere. Somebody had to have pulled some strings behind the scenes. Maybe they were getting too close to exposing the truth. Maybe there were more powerful people involved in this whole thing. Maybe someone was pulled aside, shoved up against the wall and said, if you don't drop this thing, we'll take out your entire goddamn family. And yet the whole thing was closed, sealed, and stamped with a witch hunt label to finish the entire affair off. I want to share with you a section of the article that I referenced towards the beginning of this episode, titled Revisiting the Jordan, Minnesota Cases by Rossi Cheat and Andrea Matthews. When talking about the witch hunt narrative at the end of their paper, they state, quote, "It was not the case that, as Philip Jenkins claimed, almost all the testimony that led to 25 indictments on very grave charges was invented. To the contrary, a significant part of the story in the Jordan cases appears to be about a that was never vindicated, about who were never held accountable. The Olson Commission opined that 10 cases should not have been dropped. Even defense lawyer Mark Kurzman said that a dozen or so former defendants were actually guilty of criminal with children. If that is true, and there are substantial reasons to think so, then the lessons from the witch hunt narrative are half wrong. An important but lost part of the story was a failure to vindicate children in a significant number of cases. The conventional wisdom about the Jordan cases fails to examine how they actually developed over time. Instead, the unfounded murder allegations made by a handful of children in the summer of 1984 are cited as reason to dismiss all of the evidence in the cases. Philip Jenkins did this when he formulated his critique of the case around the statements of Joshua Owens. Jenkins alleged that Joshua admitted on the stand in the Bauer case that he had told a big lie. Jenkins claimed that Joshua was a key activist in exposing the Jordan murders. But Joshua Owens is not named in the charges against the Bauers, nor did he testify at the Bauer trial. Further, he was not involved in any way with the murder allegations. Jenkins likely confused Joshua Owens and Jake Bryant in this regard, an explanation made all the more likely by the fact that the New York Times used the pseudonym Joshua in a story about Jake. The mistake demonstrates that while Jenkins, the professor, was willing to make broad statements discrediting virtually all the statements in this case, he knew so little about the underlying facts that he could not differentiate among the children. This is a problem with the witch hunt narrative in general. It ignores the chronology of the case, and it fails to treat the children as distinct individuals. Nathan and Snedeker were not the only ones to paint all of the children connected to the Jordan cases with the same brush. Alexander Cockburn used precisely the same phrase, the Jordan children, in a commentary that implies that all of the defendants except James Rood were innocent. Dr. Terrence Campbell, a forensic psychologist in Michigan who claims expertise in false allegations of was more explicit, characterizing the Jordan cases as a colossal hoax. Based on our analysis of a significant number of primary documents, that claim is extremely overblown. The charges that we examined, most likely in the first phase of arrests, were based on detailed, cross-corroborating statements of children who were not over-interviewed, and were sometimes even corroborated by adults. The charges in the second wave of arrests also appear to have been made on much stronger evidence than the witch hunt narrative acknowledges. The defendants in the second wave were linked more closely to those in the first wave than is generally recognized, particularly through the extended and dysfunctional Brown family. While some of the charges in the second wave were based on statements made by children who had already been interviewed numerous times, some were not. Some key arrests in the second phase of the case were based on statements made by children who were not very young and who made their statements in the first or second interview." End quote. So even the legal scholars that wrote the paper on this whole thing agreed that there were definitely who got away with their crimes throughout this entire thing. And they agreed that justice wasn't fully served. And there are still many to this day who believe that at least 10 of those individuals, at least 10 of them, were guilty of crimes against children. And they all got cut loose, and they all went back out into the community and never had to pay for what they did. This is coming from individuals who are in law enforcement or the judiciary of the United States government. They all agree that in this case, justice went awry, and the screams of the children went unheard. Something that I find suspicious, personal thoughts at the end of this whole affair, is how right when those murder allegations started to come out, the whole deal within the authorities and the general population went from believe the children to shut this whole thing down. And I find it very suspicious that Tom Price guy, the therapist, was brought in, and then all of a sudden all of the kids that he started working with and the deputies and investigators that worked with him, they all started saying lies. It was almost as if this Tom Price guy was brought in by somebody to invent some lies and find children that he could get to lie for him, so that when it came time to look at these cases, people could say, oh, they were just lying and the therapist was the one who told them that. It's almost as if Tom Price or somebody like Tom Price could potentially be an asset of the United States government. Maybe somebody within the FBI or CIA in a secret position or a secret role who was specifically hired or tasked to those children so that they could fix the outcome of this entire affair. Because after all this was said and done, when the ritual stuff and the murdering the kids and the details of these rituals really started to come out from these children, all of a sudden the kids were lying. All of a sudden Tom Price was influencing these kids. All of a sudden these agents and these police officers were telling the kids what to say and what to think. Keep in mind, that didn't happen at the beginning. At the beginning, these were kids that were coming forward with horrible, tragic stories. And still at the end of these cases, who knows what the truth is there? Because they weren't always coached. All of these answers weren't 100% coached. But you can clearly say, as someone who has a rational mind and the ability to critically think, you can see that those charges at the end definitely were flimsier and most likely were invented. And they were invented with help from the therapists and the authorities that were involved. Now, could the authorities have been corrupted in this case as well, as multiple members of police departments and law enforcement agencies in Minnesota had been accused of being a part of this ring? Maybe like that Greg guy who was, a cop. What's up with that? As soon as Greg gets arrested, the actual law enforcement officer, that's when all these other agents start inserting themselves into the cases and telling the kids what to say. Because at the end of the day, if you can look at one case in the eyes of the law and these scholars who wrote these articles, if one kid's lying, they gotta all be lying. That's what they want you to believe at the end of this. They want you to believe that every single kid who testified they had been victimized is a liar, which is just not true. But I do find it suspicious that when these salacious details came out and these therapists that were hired and investigators came in and started telling the kids what to say, they used that. It was like very conveniently, the therapist, the authorities who were forcing these confessions from the kids, it was like they conspired together, and when they got those false confessions from the children that they had planted in the kids, that was like a shotgun shell. They then handed that shell to whoever wanted to shut this thing down. They loaded it up and blew all the cases away. Blew them out of existence. They gave them the ammunition to shut this down. And then you had these weird corrupt judges saying James Rood's testimony can't be allowed, allowing the bullying of kids, allowing the what I believe is psychological torture of children if they want to testify. It's so bizarre. And it should be noted that a man that I'm very familiar with at this point named Paul Benassi, he's the victim of a number of different criminal rings. We'll be talking about Paul very, very soon in an upcoming production that I've been directing. So that's its own thing that we're going to get into. I don't want to talk too much about Paul or his story because it's very, very long. But Paul was involved in one of the largest predator rings in United States history. Tons of evidence. He was 100% victimized by these people. And in one of Paul's interviews that he's given over the years, back then, around the same time that this was happening, this was when Paul was being passed around those rings, and he actually testified that at one point he was brought to Jordan, Minnesota to come to a party. So Paul Benassi is the victim of a famous predator ring that was passing kids all around the United States, and he actually claimed that he was brought by the people that were passing him around to Jordan, Minnesota to participate in these things. So, is this connected to something bigger? Why was no one ever prosecuted except for the one guy? Why was the ring never fully dug up by authorities? I mean, all the testimony and the evidence was there. It was like a case that was handed to them from God, and yet they didn't do anything. And the entire thing got shut down. And it begs the question, did they want to shut this whole thing down before they actually found the bodies of children? Let's say there were law enforcement officers or more powerful people involved in these rings. The moment that the children started testifying, they could have gone and taken the bodies and burned them. You know, I know that they bury bodies and do certain ways of killing and rituals, but if these people were really that smart, which obviously they were at this time, the moment kids started talking about these activities, a group of 3 of these members of this ring, they could have gone out to where they knew the bodies were buried. They could have dug the bodies up, incinerated them, done anything with them to get rid of the bodies. Same goes for when the murder allegations actually, came out and this was in the news. They could have gone that night and gone and taken the bodies out. Who knows what they did? But I do find it suspicious that they shut this whole thing down and stopped interviewing the kids and stopped believing the kids as soon as these murders were brought up. Who else was in this cult? Were there more powerful people that were involved here? Did this go up to higher levels in the state offices of Minnesota? Was there an element of the CIA or the FBI involved in this entire affair? Why was this covered up? Because undoubtedly, this was covered up. You cannot sit here and tell me that the government and the mass media did not try to shut this down and cover it up. I challenge you right now. Look up on YouTube, look up on Google, look up on whatever search engine you're using. Jordan, Minnesota predator ring. Nothing will come up. Even on newspapers.com, you have to specifically search for search terms to bring up anything related to these cases. To this day, they've continued to cover this up. There's no Wikipedia page. There's nothing. And this was a huge affair. They make Wikipedia pages for much smaller ordeals. It's really, really bizarre that this has been a international cover-up. And it makes these people look bad too, because they never pursued individuals who actually stated to authorities that they had taken part in the victimization of kids. They actually had people admitting to the police that they had victimized children. They didn't do anything. And by the way, back in January of 1985, James Rood was given 40 years in prison for over a dozen children, something that he openly admits to have done. That means January of 1985, March of 2025, 40 years, he's free now, walking among us. I couldn't find any information about James Rood's release or his death, but I'm going to take that as meaning that he hasn't died yet, and he's as free as a bird out in society, walking amongst us. That's right, he's already out of prison for all of this torture and pain that these children suffered. He's already out free. And there's so many questions here, so many. Why did nobody do anything? Were there actually children murdered here? What kind of rituals were these people doing? What's up with the masks and the cult-like gatherings? How many victims were there? Who was involved? Was there law enforcement involved? Who wanted this covered up? So we had to head to Jordan, Minnesota ourselves on a very cold day. Our first stop that evening was the Valley Green Trailer Park, where this entire sordid affair began. So right now we're in the Valley Green mobile home trailer park here in Jordan, Minnesota. And this is where the story of these accusations really kick-started. If you'll remember, James Rood was that man who was first accused of the crimes against children that were occurring actually on the premises of this trailer park, this mobile home area. He was initially accused of targeting local children, even kids that were like his neighbor. He was accused of luring them to his home that was here, abusing them, photographing them, doing all sorts of things, but then also bringing them off this campus to these other homes in the Jordan, Minnesota area. It's really eerie, once again, to see how places move on and they forget, and you would literally have no idea that this huge thing was happening here if you didn't do the research. And even in doing the research, I do have to state, it's been virtually impossible to find any real concrete information about this whole affair because it's been unstudied, it's been unresearched, it's been unreported. I mean, how eerie to see this vacant, it was vacant a second ago, but now there are some actual kids here. Playground, essentially, that's in the heart of darkness, in this heart of darkness. This is like the center point of this mobile home area. One of the victims actually testified that they met James Rood here, and Rood took him to a local park nearby to the wooded area, and that's where some of this terrible stuff was happening. And you know, there were the allegations that the babies were thrown into the creek, they were bashed against trees, and I don't know if you can see on this map right here, this is us right here. This is the Green Valley Green Trailer Park, and then Holzer Park. This is the area where he said, one of the kids said they were taken to, and then the wooded area around there they were abused, which also, I don't know if there was a river that was flowing back then or what was going on there, but literally, I don't know where his house was in relation to this, but this wooded area where this was allegedly taking place literally backs right up to this mobile home park. So you can see the correlation right there. When you hear they were taken to a park, you imagine it might have been a bit of a drive, but no, it was literally right on the edge of this property. Right here.
Backyard.
Yeah, practically like Connor said, the backyard. Right now, there isn't that much that we can investigate in this story. A number of these allegations, these parties that were being held supposedly happened at private residences of the people connected to this story. Their addresses could not be tracked down. They're also private residences, so we can't go poking around them. But the kids stated to the police in their interviews that these babies or other children were murdered in the woods around here, buried where they died, or they were thrown into the river. So our next stop here, after checking out the evil that took place right in this area, is the park and the wooded area where all this stuff took place. And eerily enough, actually, I'll save that detail for when we get over there. What do you guys, any thoughts at the moment?
I'm just really tired of hearing stories about all these sickos that are doing all this stuff to children and just getting away with it. No repercussions or anything. Just to be able to ruin a child's life, or even kill people, and then just be able to go on and live a life like nothing ever happened. I mean, it's ridiculous. So,
Mom, you actually are the only one here who has kids of your own.
Oh my gosh, I can't even, I mean, it's hard to even believe that people are that sick and that they would do that. And then just to think, I mean, we've lived here, we come to Minneapolis, we go through Jordan all the time on our way up to the cities. Just that people actually were doing that. It's just awful. It's hard to comprehend.
You never know what's happening right in your backyard.
No, Minnesota.
I mean, that's the crazy shit too. Is that there's people who like grew up here that still don't know about it because obviously no one got charged for it. Just the one guy.
Yeah.
But what about all the other people?
Yeah.
Of course you don't know about it. People are covering it up.
Terrible.
And you're from this kind of area of the Midwest your whole life and you've never heard of this?
I have never heard of it. And you would think that we live close enough to hear that.
You would hope so.
Yeah, that we would hear, but I wish we would have. Just, it's sad that you don't hear about these cases and just protecting kids even more than we did. And we need to, nowadays, protect kids.
The bare minimum.
Yeah.
For the world.
Right.
Is to be able to protect children.
Right.
And if we're failing at that, what are we doing?
Yeah. Terrible.
Well, I also just noticed that I think this microphone's dead. So we'll have to use the handycam audio. So I'm sorry to anybody who's watching who's wondering why this clip sounds like absolute shit. Oops. Well, what do you guys say we keep venturing on?
Say we head on down to the park.
I think so. Let's go.
All right.
Isn't that weird?
Hold up. So, this device right away said, injustice, no undergarment.
But it said no right after Mary asked if we should go in the woods. It said no. And then just as we're standing here, it said undergarment.
That's kind of
And
creepy. Undergarment.
When you're investigating a case
no
like
undergarments.
Yeah, either that or it looks
No, it
like
could be
a
anything.
no.
Yeah.
Like it's trying to say no.
Yeah, it's it's capital-like.
Man, that's a pretty bizarre string of 3 words.
No undergarment.
It's really weird.
I mean, that's really strange.
That's really strange.
So right now, we are here at the Holzer Park in Jordan, Minnesota. This is where Joshua Owens claimed in his police reports and when he told the police when he was a child under, I don't know if you'd call it oath, but in sworn statements, that he was taken out here and abused multiple times by James Rood. And he said that in this area, there were photographs taken of him. He brought out a snake to intimidate him. There's obviously involved. And there are a lot of children that testified that in these areas, this is where they were taken and they were, this wooded area stretches for a while. And if you look right through there, you see those lights if you show. That's the Valley Green Trailer Park. But we're gonna go into the wooded area. Now, a big point of contention here is the children that testified that they had witnessed babies, other kids, being ritualistically murdered. Specifically, one of the victims' statements discusses a baby who was smacked against a tree and buried. Multiple children testified that babies were killed, ritualistically buried. All of this was taking place on film. They also testified that bodies of children were thrown into rivers. So there's a river, a body of water right here. This is where we're going to first investigate, and then we're going to do an Estes at the Minnesota River, which I saw mentioned a few times, which is like a 3-minute drive from here, weirdly enough. So it would have been easy access. It would be easy access to this, to get to this area. If you actually see James Rood living right there, he could get here in 2 minutes walk, and then right down to the river as well. What'd that say?
Elsie. Well, it sounds like a kid's name. Elsie.
Elsie.
Go faster.
Go fast.
Maybe running through the woods or trying to get away.
It's creepy, honestly. So it was in this area when investigators actually took Joshua out here.
Instant death.
What? Instant death?
Well, if they're actually killing babies and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it was in this area where when the police actually accompanied Joshua out here after he made those allegations, they found a plastic tarp which Joshua described as being present when these things happened to him. He said that James actually covered his child and recording equipment with that tarp because it was raining one day. There's also a can of soda that he said he had been drinking from on the day that some of this stuff happened. So there was corroborating evidence out here in this area.
Serious problem.
What the hell? That's crazy. But, all right, serious problem. To anybody who might be out here in Holzer Park, my name is Colin.
My name's Mary.
My name's Connor.
My name's Jeff.
And we're just coming here to speak. We're not trying to speak to anyone in particular, but if you witnessed some of the violence against children and the rape of these kids that happened out here in these woods, or maybe if you're a victim yourself and you were killed and left here, buried here somewhere, we would love to have you come out and speak with us tonight so we can try to get some justice for you.
Yeah.
Twins.
What?
That's kind of weird.
Twin.
Instant death, serious problem, twins?
Twins.
We're going to start this out by asking, is there somebody here with us? You don't need to feel afraid of us. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to try help.
Threatening.
Ooh.
You don't have to feel threatened by us. We're here to help you.
Bad things happened.
What did yours say?
Mine said little effort.
Little effort to try actually find what happened.
Yeah. Is there anyone here with us? Can you tell us your name?
If you're here, give us one of your names.
Cemetery.
Cemetery.
I mean, the body's buried out here.
Blown. Minimal
shit.
blown tally cemetery.
Go down.
Obviously.
I mean, that could be sexual or it could be
Or-
pointing us towards bodies.
Yeah.
Elude.
Elude.
Again.
He eluded.
Run
Just-
faster.
Eluded to go down.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Moderation. Little effort. Moderation. I don't know what that's referring to.
Can you tell us how many kids were brought out here?
Mackenzie. Another name. Like a girl's name.
Is your name Mackenzie?
Real.
real.
Cyrus.
Hunting. ANU means A-I-N-U. We should look that up.
Area.
A lie. Again, look at that. A-L.
Harriet and
A-L-A-I.
Anu Alai. You mentioned cemetery, Mackenzie. Are there bodies buried somewhere in this area that were never discovered?
Plow.
Okay, well that's
Usually.
a little weird.
They bring a plow through here to level the ground.
Additionally. Jesus, right?
Time.
Time.
Usually additionally time. Are the bodies further down that way?
You look the same.
Old.
You look
the same. Old. Huh.
Stomach
Maybe.
problems.
Stomach problems. Maybe she's talking about you look like the same people that would attack her. I mean, just older men.
Parents and adults.
Mm-hmm.
And women too.
Right.
Or us.
We're not going to hurt you. Please just come and talk to us.
Feeling.
We want to help you. Feeling? Are you feeling lonely?
Cake. Did they bring you cake to get you out here? Did they promise you cake to come here?
Stomach problems and cake.
Run down. Again, elude, run faster, run down.
Maybe they put drugs in the cake that they fed them. I know that some of the kids testified they were drugged.
There.
Oh, yeah.
There.
Scared.
Scared.
They're scared.
Polygamous.
What? Okay, now that's a little weird.
And then cathedral over here.
Polygamous,
Someone
I mean,
involved.
It was a lot of families, like wives and husbands, that were all swapping with each other and abusing each other's children, allegedly.
Hood, huh? Hood.
Were you fed a cake that had some sort of drugs in it to get you to be sleepy and it maybe hurt your stomach before you were taken here?
Upset me.
Upset me. Upset stomach. Tomb.
Are you buried out here, Mackenzie?
There's a weird energy out here.
Mackenzie, where are you buried here? Can you tell us about where?
The child wants help.
Oh, that's strange.
Sunken. So
Sunken.
Like a sunken grave.
It's someone else.
It's someone, so it's not a child
not
who's out
Mackenzie?
here. Or maybe Mackenzie's like just a spirit that was here who saw this happen.
Can you tell us how we can help the children? I want to figure out who did these crimes.
That's so weird.
My name is Anna. Harold.
Anna?
This has like 30,000 words and phrases. So.
That one will spit out some crazy stuff.
Anna, if you're here with us,
Horology?
I'm protecting you.
Were you also trying to protect the children?
Is it
Bench.
horticulture?
there's a lot of benches around here.
You are in the park.
Can you tell us more about Anna?
Anna, can I ask you if you were here? What is
Not instant. A bridgehead.
A bridge? There's a bridge over there that goes over the creek.
Yeah, maybe
Oh,
that's
weird.
burial
There
spot.
is right there.
It's a tomb sunken.
Bridgehead?
Bridgehead.
I've never even heard that word.
Gas.
Churchwomen.
That's disturbing.
Cathedral churchwomen. Connection to that somehow.
Well, there's a bunch of women that were supposedly involved.
But I mean, using that kind of like excuse. Carol.
Carol Lalick charged of sexually children.
Really?
No shit.
Okay.
She's one of the people.
The ground.
Coleman.
The ground.
Wow.
For legal purposes, I want to remind everybody, these are all alleged allegations that were made by children. We are just investigating those allegations.
Chert. C-H-E-R-T. I mean, these words. Can you help? Question mark.
That's what we're trying to do.
How can we help you? I think the biggest way for us to help you is if you can tell us some details about what happened out here. He's lived here, so it's like an older spirit from like maybe
Or
pioneer times.
It's one of the kids who lived over there in the...
And Cordon. C-O-R-D-O-N. I don't.
Olivia.
Olivia. I think that has something to do with the story.
Really?
Person driving around over there.
Yeah, I saw that. Lily, are you here with us?
Let's play a game.
The games that they would make the children
Right.
play.
Yes.
What kind of game do you want to play?
That was a huge part of this case, is children saying that they were forced to play these versions of like classic games like hide and seek or tag.
Terrible.
Pasha. P-A-S-H-A.
Maybe if you were present at any of these crimes, or if you yourself were a victim, can you tell us what kind of games these adults made you play?
Teleology.
Oh, that car is driving by real slow.
Plant.
Emotion.
What was the emotion it made you feel?
games at night.
Small group.
Oh, that's exactly what it was. A small group. It was a small group of parents and abusers that would hold these parties.
Crazy.
Well, compactify would be, also to make it smaller.
We're not nasty.
We're not nasty.
I think it's those games that they felt like they were nasty. They were making them play some sexual game.
Black eyes.
Black eyes?
I'm getting punched in the face.
Well, that's like a huge... Black eyes, like panda eyes, is a huge thing of like children who have these like really eyes that are so bruised and have had so many capillaries bust that their eyes are like black panda eyes. That's a huge thing.
Stauffer.
Weird. That's terrible.
S-T-A-U-F-F-E. Rap.
Are you saying that you had black eyes? Are you saying that you had a black eye or black eyes after a game that was played? We just want details on the game.
Chip. GYP. There.
Hung, drawn, and quartered.
All right, whoever's here with us, we're gonna do this thing called a spirit box. Galveston?
Didn't you say? Or no, that was the other guy. He was in Houston for a while.
Yeah. We're gonna do this thing called a spirit box. Anybody who's here, if you just talk with your normal voice, we should be able to hear you. If you guys get anything on those, be sure to read them out too. Whoever's here, we've been talking about games. Leapfrog? Can you tell us more about these games that the adults would play with the children at these parties?
We're the only. They're pretty upset.
Oh, I heard their creak. Camera. There was cameras at these parties? So, were these adults wearing masks filming while children were...
Oh, just.
On the tip? Humanity. Crazy.
Wait, did you hear that? There was like a footstep right here. Said twisted. Oh my god, that scared me. Twisted? Like Twister, maybe? Show this on camera?
It doesn't have to be exactly. Even on the box.
Did you play like Twister while you were naked with these adults? Or did they play?
That's pretty awful.
Told you. Ralph? Did it make you want to throw up? Like, I think we talked for a second about drugs in some cake. Did these...
Quiet.
Did these evil adults give you cake that made you feel really funny?
Hurt.
Kevin. Behind his house. I know there's an allegation that babies were buried behind somebody's house. So can you tell us what's the deal with this cake that you were talking about?
American.
Bisexual.
What?
Bisexual. The last one was nip.
Deceived.
Deceived.
Do you feel like these adults deceived you?
Man.
They were
Got a kiss from me?
Nightgown?
Nightgown.
You said undergarment out
Mhm.
here
Mhm.
I really want to know about this cake or the games. Can you talk about either of those for a second?
Forcible.
Forcible?
Forcible.
Burnt?
Was the cake burnt?
Fox chicken. This is better.
Protein rich. So what do you mean about the cake? Protein rich. What do you mean? Can you just confirm to us that the parties with all these adults were real and that they were happening?
Please fight.
Where's the party? My family? Dude, that's insane. Because the parties were between parties were between family members, like sleeping with their own children and pimping them out.
That was twisted.
So it's true. Can you just say yes or something like that about these parties? Preschool?
That wasn't here.
Where were the kids buried?
Down.
Were these parties real?
Burn again? Can you just say yes?
I will do.
Listen.
Flat iron.
So are there children's, like babies' bodies buried somewhere out here? Where we are right now?
To the left. To the left.
Burn them.
And we got burned. Burn them, like 3 burned.
Remember burning them? Flat iron.
8.
Maybe they tortured them with a towel. That's part of the punishment so that can fly.
Twins.
Different device.
Where?
Completely different device.
Twins on this.
Are the bodies of 2 twins buried out here?
Baby.
I heard Minnesota. Did they mean the Minnesota River? Where the other bodies they think could have been buried? Maybe there aren't bodies here, but are there bodies buried near the Minnesota River?
Slither like a snake?
Slither like a snake.
That's the snake that he brought out here to get the boy to agree to be
Aggressive.
Revolving.
Can you tell us
There was
again?
also a gun.
You heard us.
Can you tell us if there's bodies buried down by the river? The river?
Mackenzie and Elsie are buried here. Those are the twins. Is that true that there are the bodies of those 2 twin girls here somewhere?
They never found me.
That's crazy. She's stuck here.
Yeah.
Never found me. Where are you? Can you give us a direction as to where your body is? Native to the west. Where are your bodies, Elsie and Mackenzie? Looking for a grave.
Felt great. Or
So why were the girls murdered? Why were the kids murdered? Merlin? Were these children murdered for snuff films?
the rest of them there?
My uncle?
The family.
Ugh. Were some of these kids killed on recording?
Soundproof.
Graveyard again.
Soundproof graveyard? Ugh, I don't like that. Were they tortured and in somebody's house and then buried out in places like this?
Buried alive.
Grab.
What does it say?
Grab.
And what does that thing say, Spirit?
On the beach.
By the river?
Yeah.
Do you want us to go somewhere else to talk to you? Where would that be?
Should we go down to the river to see if there's other victims there? Follow them. Come here.
Lawyer.
Lawyer?
Yeah.
Did they film these kids being murdered?
Well, there was lawyers obviously involved.
That hurt.
That hurt. Splash. Water. Thrown in the river.
So should we go down to the river?
It was arranged. Colin?
What?
It was arranged, like, you know.
Snuff film?
Yeah, they had it all set up and gathered.
Ooh, they gather for the tapings or to watch them? Next.
So you made snuff films? Who did you sell those snuff films to?
Chicago. Do you hear that? Chicago. Chicago was a huge hub of the child industry. Like, was this part of a ring? So, with these snuff films, were they created just for the group's pleasure, or were they created with the intent to be sold to other people who enjoyed that type of sick shit? Can you clarify that?
1 second. Okay. We'll give you a little bit of time.
Support them. Is it
Support them?
Not even sure.
Not really sure. Were these films for pleasure or for profit? Can you tell me that?
Who watched these snuff films that you sold them to? Anyone.
Wow.
Like in the river? A body floating in the river?
Do you want us to go to the river?
Impulse.
We want you to go? So one more time, I just want to confirm that you've been telling us that these allegations and rumors are true, and there are two twins, possibly named Elsie and Mackenzie, out here buried somewhere.
I'll rub.
Well, do I have to turn that off? Oh, Jesus.
Hillbilly.
Oh my God, wait, no. I like the toys. Hold up. That could be the craziest one. I like the toys. So according to one of the victims, I believe it was Joshua, he testified, and it's in the police reports, that the guy, James, who was the ringleader of at the beginning, this ring, would refer to him as his toy and his new toy, and he would bring him around to other adults and say, do you like your new toy? This is my toy. So I like the toys. I mean, isn't that a little bizarre? It's in writing in the police report that they referred to the victims as toy.
Right.
So gross.
Yeah.
Holloway.
It is weird though, because it seems like they almost don't want to answer a direct question. I don't know if they're still scared or if They don't have the knowledge, but we got a lot of indirect answers. Seems like there might be 2 baby twins or children buried out here somewhere. But I think we have to finish this by going to the actual bank of the river where also kids testified there might be babies or children buried, or they were thrown in.
Yeah.
All right.
Weird vibe.
Very weird.
All right. Hey everybody, it's Colin here. Thank you for watching today's video. Hello to all the new subscribers and hello to the rest of our beautiful, wonderful, spooky family. As you know, every single week here on the channel, we give away a free gift bag to one lucky viewer of the show. And this week, to enter the contest, all you have to do is like today's video, let's smash that like button, and comment, "That's so crazy," in the comment section below. I'm gonna give y'all 10 seconds to do this now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So go comment. You can comment multiple times. It helps the video so much. But anyways, let's get back to today's video. Thank you for listening to my little spiel. I love you guys so much, and stay spooky. So we had one more question and one more place to explore. What about those children? What about the bodies of those kids that they said were thrown into the river, were buried near the bank of the river or on the bank of the river? Kids they said that were murdered right there. It's hard to imagine that something like that could really happen in America, but it does, and it has. So this isn't a question of if this happened. It's, in my mind, how many kids were killed. So to try find the truth for ourselves, we headed out to the Minnesota River to investigate the area to see if we could generate any new leads or gather any new answers. And this was about to get really f***ed up. Oh, this is creepy, man. Man, look at these trees, dude. How creepy is this? I mean, seriously, look at this. Isn't this eerie? Like, this looks like a horror film back here. Oh. Dude, this is actually wild. Alright guys, so right now we are back in a wooded area right near the Minnesota River here. This also could have been a place where children were taken out, and this definitely seems more like a likely candidate for a place where a ritual or some sort of sex party or a murder would have taken place. I mean, just visually, this place is extremely dark. This path, I'm assuming, goes back a pretty far distance. And these trees, I can't remember the last time I've seen trees that actually look like this. I mean, it's like very eerie out here. So right now we're gonna do a DR60 voice recorder session and just see if we can pick anything up while we're here. All right, we're here in the woods. If there's somebody with us, can you please say your name?
Can you tell us if rituals were performed on children out here?
Was anybody murdered and thrown in the river in this area?
Can you give us the name of one of the children?
Were snuff films filmed in these woods? It's a movie where someone's murdered on camera.
How many victims were there in these crimes?
Were the parents of the children that were exploited in these crimes involved in all of the snuff films and torture and so forth?
Did the people that committed these crimes get caught?
And lastly, are there any bodies buried out in these woods? All right.
Alright, we're here in the woods. If there's somebody with us, please say your name. Can you tell us if rituals were performed on children out here? Was anybody murdered and thrown in the river in this area?
Oh my gosh.
Was anybody murdered and thrown in the river in this area?
Oh my god.
Were snuff films filmed in these woods? It's a movie where someone's murdered on camera.
I heard yes.
Were snuff films filmed in these woods? It's a movie where someone's murdered on camera.
Oh, I hear that.
Snot. He said snot.
How many victims in these woods? It's a movie where someone's murdered on camera. How many victims were there in these crimes?
You said one?
I heard one.
Were the parents of the children that were exploited in these crimes involved in all snuff films and torture and so forth? Did the people that committed
Did it say what? It sounded like one.
It sounded like one.
exploited in these crimes involved in all snuff films and torture and so forth?
Oh, 20.
Yeah.
20.
You gotta listen to that closer. I can't. Oh, that
What
was
did you
something
ask?
too.
What did you ask for? No, we'll hear it. Never mind. That sounds like 20.
Oh, there's definitely something there.
They're right there, too. 20.
Never.
And that.
Are there any bodies buried out in these woods?
Well, that lasted a long time.
Wow. That was pretty crazy.
No,
You got
seriously.
some great answers there.
I mean, what are the takeaways from that?
I mean, the people were never caught.
They weren't caught.
There are
Fair.
victims that are buried out here.
A lot of people involved.
20 people involved and then one victim?
Maybe they really...
Maybe it's just maybe the one baby that they were like bashing up against a tree.
Really tortured.
What do you think about that, Mom? You're kind of over
God.
here.
That was really creepy. Those were some good answers.
All right, we're gonna do one more. Are there bodies buried out here in this wooded area?
Did they throw bodies in the river?
What sort of weapons did the 20 individuals use to torture or kill the one individual it sounds like they did here?
Were you called a toy or used as a toy?
All right, let's listen one more time.
What is that? Oh,
Are there bodies buried out here in this wooded area?
A lot of them.
Oh, one again?
No,
a lot of
I
them.
have to listen really close.
Are there bodies buried out here in this wooded area?
A lot.
Did they throw bodies in the river?
It's like a whole sentence. Sounds like they threw bodies in there.
Did they throw bodies in the river?
What the f?
What was that?
The f?
River. I heard the word river.
What the hell is that?
That last word was river.
I have to listen back to that on headphones.
The 20 individuals used to torture or kill the one individual sounds like they did here. Were you called a toy or used as a toy?
Whatever that
What the
long sentence was is freaky.
I know.
Yeah.
That was really creepy.
That was eerie,
Ooh.
guys.
Those are some good DR60s.
I mean, this area feels active.
Yeah.
You know?
It does.
Yeah.
It feels really creepy.
Well, you want to set up and do a DR or Estes method?
Sure.
All right. All right, guys. So we're sitting right now by the bank of the river. It's just right over there through those trees. And we're gonna do an Estes method session. If you've never seen an Estes method before, basically what I'm gonna do is be listening to a spirit box. I'm gonna be listening to a spirit box through these headphones super loud, so I won't be able to hear their questions. And I'm gonna put a hood over my head, cover my eyes, and I'm gonna be reading out spirit box answers, which is what we were using before by the last location that we were at. So I want you guys to focus on maybe as some ideas what was happening at the parties, bodies buried out here, was it real, stuff like that, the games.
To anyone who's out here with us right now, we're trying to look for answers about the group of that was assaulting and
The Hammer.
kids. Do you know anything
There
about
was
these
3 to
people?
5 of them. Curry.
3 to 5 kids or molesters?
Oh, I just heard, I swear to God, ring like a singing.
What else did they do to the children?
CNOW.
Did they bury any of their victims out here, right where around the area we're in?
Bring home a new 5.
What were the names of some of the victims?
Jacqueline. The monster comes.
Did Jacqueline get killed out here?
As far as the eye.
Is Jacqueline buried out here?
Stomach. She was horribly handsome.
Were there twins involved?
I got picked once, maybe? Twilight.
Would they bring the kids out here and promise of maybe candy and games?
Take me.
What'd they do with the
Go
body?
a little further.
What'd they do with the body or bodies that they killed? How'd they dispose of them?
We had a 5-1. They're cooking in a white.
Yeah. What are they cooking?
A little one.
Oh. Oh, remember we got burnt over there? Was something burnt?
Maybe they burnt the body.
I'm gonna try to play with you. Aren't these delicious?
What did they do with the bodies?
There was a PayPal transfer. I just heard like a.
He's choking on.
Were they filming the things they did out in these woods?
All 45. Little back road.
Were they filming snuff films?
Ate them for dinner.
Gosh.
They're eating these kids.
Oh.
Maybe it's a ritual.
Yeah.
Were they eating the kids or parts of them as a ritual?
The death toll is high.
Why were they doing this?
Mail.
Meal?
Yeah.
Ooh, I just heard a creepy voice. Yummy.
Oh.
Just like that.
It's terrible.
Nah. With queso.
How many people were involved?
A complete.
Were the parents involved?
There's a lawyer. Oh, a really sad little kid. Please help.
Can you tell me how many kids were hurt out here?
Check the yard, boy. Or something like that.
Are there bodies buried out here?
There was one person they thought there might be
George Lucas.
buried in his backyard.
Right. Oh, right.
Is somebody associated with George Lucas, like they like Star Wars, or why do you say George Lucas?
Maybe they were just making movies.
Right.
I loved Star Wars. I swear to God. I just thought I heard George Lucas too.
How old are you?
Oh, that was creepy, man. Oh. Oh, that actually gave me a chill. I've never heard some. I mean, I've heard, but away with it and go.
Can you tell me how old you are?
I feel somebody to the left by where Connor would be. Checking the wreckage.
Are you sitting here next to me?
9 to 2.
Can you come hold my hand?
Mama.
We're really sorry that this happened to you. But we want to make sure we can tell your story right. Is there anything you can tell us about what happened to you?
The weed in the something. All in black. Austin.
Yeah.
Is Austin your name?
Ugh, femoral artery.
That'd be the place that they'd
Don't need to know that.
bleed them out.
You're saying I don't need to know your name?
Some are still active. This week we're connecting to them.
Can you tell me some of the people that were connected's names?
Near the water. It happened.
What happened near the water?
I'm gonna keep it on the down low.
Did all of you wear black? Was that because it was part of a ritual? Were these ritual killings?
I'm not playing. It's Delilah.
Delilah? Were you a child?
They wore masks and shit.
Did they play with toys?
Dude, there's a lot of voices here.
This thing's good.
Pants down or something.
Is there anything you
Grab
can
the
tell
camera.
us? Is there anything you can tell us that would help us find the people who did this to you?
Stop looking for teddies.
A person named Teddy? You don't think we should look for someone named that? Or are you talking about teddy bears?
Ain't no love. Ooh, I just heard. In the immediate area. Terror.
This area is filled with a lot of caves.
Shallow.
Again, shallow earlier.
Are you in a shallow grave out here? Or did they throw you in the shallow water?
I'm on the fringes, on your arm.
Are you sitting here next to me?
You seem like nice people.
Yeah, you don't have to be afraid of us. We're just trying to help you.
How come you can't move on?
Those damn bones.
Do you want somebody to find the bones?
You can't move
Oh, we
on.
should look for them.
You can't
No.
move on until they find your body? Is that what you're trying to say?
Ooh, Jeff. Like that.
Yeah, and you can move on without someone finding your body or bones. So remember, you can do that.
Follow the wall to the piggy?
What's that mean? Is that where your body is?
142.90.
Could be maybe a coordinate.
Write down in notes 142.90.
Ooh, cemetery.
Again, had that earlier.
How many kids are buried out here? I'm afraid it's more than one.
This is the best place.
This is the best.
Oh, I swear, bodies near.
So much about
So
bodies.
maybe they like the torturers, the molesters like this place.
Yeah.
Why is this the best place?
You donate $11, they send it to you. Oh, yeah.
So they're for the snuff films. They would pay for them. They're only $11.
They're all over. You always need to be armed.
Do some of the
About
people,
4.
Do some of the people who committed these crimes still live in Valley Green?
Think of the time we've had.
We really appreciate you talking with us. We're still fighting for you.
Police interviews are bullshit.
Were there police involved?
I miss my mama.
What's your mom's
They
name?
chained him. Want to go home for the holidays. Burned.
So much about burn. Yeah.
Taking him. Ooh, burn and then dumped.
Oh.
Literally like that. Dude, that was a creepy voice.
That's the tool.
Then dumped.
That's the weapon.
Thank you. There's nowhere else. What do you think?
Is that why your body hasn't been found? It was just bones?
Behind the building, they did it.
Tell us what they did to you.
I mean, if the fire gets so hot, it could
There was about 95 there.
95 there?
Doing this to parents is crazy.
So the parents were involved.
It's a party.
Oh, well, they had parties.
parents, probably all kinds of people. Except
Had to prove yourself.
prove yourself to be part of the party? Was it like a gang? Like a cult?
Teacher.
Okay. Teacher would be a great...
Ooh, the baby's here.
Did a baby get killed here?
It was a doctor that did it. Up and down, up and down.
Damn. They said they was literally like swinging it around.
Oh my gosh, right.
And you're just bashing it on a tree.
This something's gonna blow up.
What made them do this?
Killed. That's the bridge between the two worlds.
What can we do to help you?
There's only one reason.
What's the reason?
I wanted slaves.
We're gonna be leaving here.
Power. 14 years. Pattern, wigs.
Is there anything else you can tell us before we leave tonight that would give us more clues to who did this?
One was nominated. You can see him on Sundays.
Nominated.
Head for Oklahoma, you know. Trade any you want. Minnesota. One must die.
So much to go through. It's hard to.
Right.
You have to research.
I feel filthy.
Oh, terrible.
Don't feel filthy.
There's more out here.
Nothing you did was your fault. These grown-ups are supposed to protect you, and they took advantage of you instead.
Yes, no.
They let you down.
Oh my God. A kid just said like, it feels like, and then I heard that laugh. They like cut the kid off.
Terrible.
Well, we're really, really sorry that this happened to you. What they did to you was not okay.
I really need a compass. Can't get, oh my God, a kid, I swear. Can't get out like that. Oh, that's really sad.
You can get out though, right? I mean, you don't have to be stuck here. Search for something good where you're at and follow that.
A game I like to play.
We're gonna be leaving now. We really appreciate you talking to us, and we're gonna keep looking into this to see what we can find. We're really trying to help you out.
No rules anymore. Am I under arrest?
Never.
No. We hope you can move on.
Feeding on me, I think.
God, it's just... Should we be scared down here?
They're all upset. The heat.
Should we get in?
Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
That was Colin. Wow.
How long was that?
That was like really right on.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of it made sense.
They were burning and eating these kids.
What?
Like, yeah, a lot of burnt. Yeah.
Might be a pastor. Might be.
What?
Yeah.
A nominated person.
I was like,
Uh-huh.
and we were asking, why can't you move on? He said, my bones. And I was like,
Yeah, bones.
You can't move on until they find your body.
Shit, that's actually crazy.
That is
from
really
the beginning
crazy.
too.
Yeah.
And that would explain why no one was ever found too.
Right. That's
And they were
scary.
selling the snuff films for $11.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Ugh.
Probably be like 11,000.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
common denomination for snuff films was 10,000.
Really weird.
That's weird. Well, to anybody who is out here, I wish we could find and locate you, but we just don't have the crew or the means to do that. But thanks for talking to us and to me, and we're gonna fight for you.
Wow, that was a good
That was
one,
good.
Colin.
So at the end of the day, I know this has been an incredibly long episode, but thank you to everybody who has joined me on this journey. I hope you can tell now that men and women got away with children in a ritualistic fashion in the town of Jordan, Minnesota in the 1980s. Some of those people are alive today. And if they're watching this video, justice is coming, alive or dead. One day, you will be served justice. I don't know if it'll be in this world or the next, but you didn't get away with your crimes. You just got lucky when you covered them up. And I hope that I've showed you guys that this sort of a thing is not in the realm of imaginary fantasy. That this sort of a thing doesn't exist in the realm of fantasy. The script that I just read to you wasn't, the script for an upcoming horror film or a thriller. This is real life. These are real lives. Real children that were victimized. And real adults that got away with those sickening crimes. If you don't believe in the paranormal, that's fine. I do. I've been doing this for 10 years and I wholeheartedly believe in what we do here on this channel. And either way, performing these investigations, getting answers of our own, getting people to watch these videos. That helps to educate people and teach them the real stories of our country and these people that got away with these crimes. In a perfect world, I'd like to see them reopen these cases and prosecute those people who definitely should have been rotting in prison. But I know that that's never going to happen. After this whole thing was done, the town of Jordan, Minnesota stamped the witch hunt narrative label on this whole thing and moved on. And to this day, nobody talks about it. I think I'm the only YouTube video even talking about this whole thing. It's pretty crazy. Let's not toot my own horn. I looked up videos trying to find anything to construct this video, and I couldn't find a f***ing one. So hopefully you've learned something today, because these people are out there and they never stop. Evil never takes a night to rest. Evil never takes the night off. Evil never takes a nap. It's always there and it's always ready. It can strike at any time. But only together, as parents, family members, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, if we all come together, together is the only way that we can stop this stuff from happening, and by raising awareness. So if you've enjoyed today's deep dive with me, please be sure to like the video and leave me a comment. But my voice is almost gone and I'm exhausted. It's just crazy. The children of Jordan. And a final word to the kids who were victimized in Jordan, Minnesota. If any one of you happens to watch this film, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I'm going to continue fighting for you. And above all, the most important thing, I believe you. Good night, guys. Hello.